A 15-year-old kid who was looked down on by everyone because he couldn't use magic. Turns out this guy can casually take out a high-level mage without breaking a sweat. Just a basic move to shatter their jaw, locking their mouth so they can't chant spells. Even the simplest touch can destroy a brain and end a life in a heartbeat. From an outcast at the bottom of society, this guy has become the ultimate mage slayer. It's insane. Turns out in his past life he was known as the top assassin on the server. Even without mana, he possessed elite assassination techniques. Even an empire's prince hiding deep in the palace was still taken out by him just like that. Reborn in the past, he accidentally became the strongest melee mage on the continent. These mages met their perfect counter. He switched from casting spells to blessing them with a beating guise. The magic kingdom of Fairnest, ruled by noble mages, has been locked in a long, grueling war for the throne. Now this brutal conflict is finally reaching its climax. Tonight at the royal palace, a cruel plan has been set in motion. The second prince decides to eliminate the ninth prince, Henry, who is at a remote villa. He gives a ruthless order: wipe them all out, leave no one behind. His subordinates bow to obey, but unease quickly spreads when a guard is suddenly taken out. With one noise, a mysterious figure steps out of the shadows. It's Van, an assassin with silver hair and glowing red eyes. He calmly steps over the guard's body and interrupts their conversation. "Sorry to butt in, but you two are the second princes, right?" This sudden appearance makes the princes scream in terror. Who are you? Who has the guts?" Seeing their master threatened, the ponytail mage steps in to block the way. With contempt, he calls Van an annoying rat. Recognizing Van's signature red eyes, the mage mocks him, insulting the Gonda tribe as lowly magicless scum. He confidently swings his staff to attack. "Let me tell you, sneak attacks won't work on me." But Van blocks the strike with his bare hands and knocks the mage out in one go. Seeing their powerful protector defeated so easily, the two princes are in a complete panic, trembling. "What the hell are you doing?" Facing a fist, devoid of mana, Van coldly explains, "When you apply force to the nasal bone at the precise angle, the bone shards pierce straight into the brain. Whether you have magic or not doesn't matter anymore, because at the end of the day, mages are just flesh and blood." The princes break into a cold sweat, trembling and unable to speak. Just then, Van senses something strange behind him. Another white-haired mage suddenly appears. The old man immediately chants, "O lightning spirit, gather in my hand." A fierce bolt of lightning streaks toward Van, but he dodges it in the nick of time. Van immediately closes the distance and unleashes a jawbreaker. Van warns coldly, "You can't chant spells anymore." But the old mage roars crazily, "Don't look down on me, I don't need to chant to..." He stubbornly swings his staff to attack again. With the slightest hesitation, Van lands a blow that sends him packing. He looks at the motionless body and sighs, "I warned you." Watching both the swordsman and the A-rank mage get taken out in a flash, the princes collapse to the floor. "What, no magic? This is impossible." Van slowly approaches, his red eyes glowing in the dark. "Why are you so surprised? There's no rule saying you can't beat magic users without magic, right?" The princes frantically pull their swords, pointing them at Van, yelling, You're the assassin hired by Henry, right?" Van calmly replies, "I am an assassin, but I wasn't hired. I'm just helping a friend." The princes laugh crazily. "Don't be ridiculous! Friends with the royal family, you lowly, magicless Gonda cattle, you think you're worthy." His insult touches on the painful past of the Gonda tribe, who were once chained and treated as slaves. Van's eyes darken with murderous intent. The princes scream desperately, "How much are you getting paid? Tell me, I'll pay double, triple." But in the end, they couldn't escape their fate. Looking down at the lifeless bodies, Van coldly mutters, "We are not cattle." The deaths of the two princes were later announced by the royal family as caused by a sudden illness. A grand funeral was held, officially ending the long, bloody war for the throne. Inside the palace, in a quiet room, the ninth prince, Henry, is lost in thought, reading a book when he suddenly catches the scent of an uninvited guest. Van sits casually on the windowsill and speaks softly, "Sorry to disturb you," seeing his friend. Henry smiles with relief. "You did well." Standing on the windy balcony under the night sky, the young prince declares proudly, "I will definitely become the next king." Van responds gently, "Congratulations. How does it feel to finally achieve your long-held dream?" But Henry turns back and asks, "What are you talking about?" Henry's eyes are full of determination as he looks at Van. This is just where our dream begins. He loudly vows, I swear once I ascend to the throne, I will completely abolish all discriminatory policies against the magicless Ganda people. I won't let anyone call you cattle ever again. Hearing these heartfelt words from his soulmate, Van smiles, his red eyes shining with trust. I believe you can do it, my friend. Under the full moon, the two touch hands like a sacred promise for the future. The atmosphere becomes more relaxed, and Henry excitedly asks, by the way, will you attend my coronation? Coronation. Van realistically shakes his head with a bitter smile. If a Ganda tribesman appeared in such a formal place, they'd be kicked out immediately. Henry immediately dismisses it. Don't worry, I won't let that happen. I'm going to be king after all. Witnessing his friend's passion, Van smiles and kindly advises, I really appreciate the gesture. But don't cause trouble for yourself just as you've taken the throne. It takes time to change people's perceptions. I can wait patiently. Looking out at the shimmering city under the night, Henry smiles with gratitude. I understand. Thanks for your concern. Van replied, lost in thought for a moment before gently suggesting, you know, why don't you head back home? Take some time to rest. The days of fightings are behind us now. I want you to relax a little. Hearing this, Van smiled and agreed, that's a good idea, I'll do that. Hanzo looked at his friend with deep affection. Yes, please spend some time with your family. Under the windy night sky. Van's house was hidden away in a super chill spot in the suburbs, completely cut off from the hustle and bustle of the royal capital in the distance. Returning to a quiet life. Van wrung out a wet towel and wiped the water off his toned body and back, which was covered in signature X-shaped scars. He turned on the storm lantern, illuminating a study room filled with antiques. The room was packed with stacks of thick ancient books and practice wooden stakes covered in dust, standing before a human anatomy diagram hanging on the wall. Van sighed softly to himself. Has the war really ended? That question unintentionally stirred up memories of a past conversation between him and Henry by the windy lakeside. Back then, Van had argued that his complete lack of magic power was an absolute advantage, making it easy for him to stay hidden and never be detected by mages. However, Hanzo had been extremely worried about the future, saying, the opponents we have to face from now on, those are the greatest archmages in the kingdom, the magic. Elite swordmasters and even battle-hardened magic gladiators, people who have trained magic to the absolute pinnacle. Regarding his friend's fear of how one could ever defeat such monsters, Van had just calmly replied, then I'll just learn magic too. The statement left Henry stunned, but, you don't have any magic power. Van's eyes at that time were full of determination as he asserted, I will understand magic better than anyone else in this world, and hone my martial arts to the ultimate level to overcome it. That's all. Van smiled, finishing his story. Henry smiled back, relieved. I understand now. That's definitely your style, Van. Returning to the present. Van slowly closed the old book in his hand and sighed, whispering to himself, that really was one long, drawn-out battle. The next morning, under a clear sky in the royal capital, the marketplace was buzzing with activity, with vendors' calls echoing through the alleys. Van, now wearing a hooded cloak, strode past the stalls. His attention was caught by a fruit stand selling fresh southern fruits that had just been imported that morning. Seeing the ripe, succulent pineapples, Van paused for a moment, thinking, it's rare to see this fruit. It's been a long time since I've been home. Maybe I should buy some as a gift. In his mind, he pictured his little sister happily hugging her favorite pineapples. Thinking is doing, Van approached the stall and spoke calmly, Boss, let me have one. The bald shopkeeper immediately responded with a grin, coming right up, regular customer. That will be 1 silver coin. But just then a light breeze blew past, causing Van's hood to tilt slightly to one side, revealing his silver hair and the signature burning red eyes of the Ganda tribe. Immediately, the shopkeeper's attitude did a 180-degree turn. The old man's face changed faster than a pancake. He clicked his tongue in contempt and flatly waved his hand to shoo him away. Get lost. Can't you read? We don't sell to the Ganda scum here, the man said while pointing at a No Ganda Tribe sign hanging right above his head. Faced with such blatant discrimination, Van's face hardened. Under the shadow of his hood, he did not argue, just silently pulled out 2 shining silver coins and held them up in front of the shopkeeper. Seeing a windfall worth many times the actual value, the bald shopkeeper's eyes widened in surprise. Van asked coldly. Are you selling or not? Choose. Taking the bag of fruit, Van walked away quietly amidst the prying eyes and the malicious whispers of the surrounding people. Look, that's a Gonda, right? Why? Would someone like him dare to walk around the royal capital so openly? Don't get near him, you'll catch the curse and lose your magic. Hearing those bitter insults, Van just quietly lowered his head and kept walking. How could anyone catch it? The only tribe in the world that possesses absolutely no magic at all. The cruel truth about the origin of the Gonda tribe was a festering wound in the kingdom's history. Long ago, the ancient kings made a brutal decision. They turned the magicless Gonda into cattle to serve the Ankasan magic tribe. They established a class system and treated people based on how much magic power they possessed. The magic tribe shamelessly exploited the labor of the magicless tribe, pushing them into heavy, life-threatening jobs and even forcing them to serve as cannon fodder in wars. The only thing considered equal between the two tribes were the heavy taxes dumped upon them. Even worse, whenever there was social instability or a rising wave of dissatisfaction with the royal family. The royal family would bring the Gonda people out as a sacrificial offering, using them as a tool to appease public opinion. The whole country turned a blind eye to those horrific crimes. Every natural disaster, plague, or catastrophe that occurred on this land was blamed on the cursed Gonda tribe. They became a convenient outlet for the resentment of the magic tribe and the helplessness of the dynasty. Thinking of these things, Van couldn't help but grit his teeth, his heart filled with indignation. How disgusting! Walking amidst the searching glances of the crowd on the capital street, anxiety continued to weigh heavily on his mind. In this world, will the day come when everyone in the village can live with a smile on their face? Just then, the sounds of children playing rang out ahead. Wait for me! A brown-haired child busy running after friends suddenly tripped and fell hard to the ground. The painful fall made the child burst into tears. Witnessing that, Van stopped immediately. He approached and kindly leaned down to ask, "Are you okay?" Hearing the warm voice, the child stopped crying and looked up. Seeing Van's face up close, the child gasped in surprise. Big brother has red eyes, causing Van to... Startled for a moment, he lowered his gaze and gave a soft nod of acknowledgement. Yet contrary to the prejudice of the adults, the child's eyes lit up with pure, fanboyish admiration. That was so cool. The child's innocent, heartfelt praise caught Van off guard. He stood stunned for a moment before the kid hopped up, running to catch up with his friends while looking back. Waving his hand with a radiant smile, the kid called out, "Thanks a lot, big brother." Watching the small figure disappear into the distance, Van offered a gentle, soft smile in return. Don't mention it. That warm moment ignited a fierce spark of hope in his heart after all. Everyone is human regardless of their background. The magic users and the non-magic users would surely find a day to shake hands in harmony, just like how he and Henry had managed to do. The two of them would redraw the destiny of the nation. He and Henry would definitely make that vision a reality together. Under the bright moonlight of the late night, Van walked briskly along the familiar forest path, clutching the pineapple bag he had just bought, his heart overflowing with indescribable nostalgic emotions. I'm really late. It's been 15 years, hasn't it? I wonder if the two of them will be happy to see me. Memories from 15 years ago suddenly flooded his mind that day by the hearth of their cozy little wooden house. His mother had been busy cooking while gently advising him, "I don't know where you're going to work, but when you return, remember to bring home a wife." Her words left Van completely bewildered, only able to stammer back, "Huh?" His little sister Lena had playfully chimed in, "That's right, big brother. You have to introduce her to us before you get married, okay?" At their simple meal before he left, his gentle mother ladled soup for him and advised, "All right then. Once you've made your decision, give it your absolute best. But if things ever become too difficult, you can always come back home." Lena had also chimed in, beaming, "When you come back, I'll make the mushroom soup you love the most." In a tight, lingering family hug, his mother had handed him a necklace. An amulet with a red gem accompanied by a wish, "Take care and travel safely." Returning to reality, Van caressed the red gem necklace in his hand, smiling happily at the thought of finally reuniting with his dearest family after so many long, agonizing years. But just as he reached the edge of the forest, Van's footsteps suddenly came to a dead halt. The pineapple bag slipped from his hand and hit the ground. A horrific godforsaken fire, had reduced the village to ash. Thick black smoke billowed up, swallowing everything. Van stood frozen in shock, his red eyes narrowing in utter disbelief. What is this?" The home village was submerged in a sea of towering flames. Van rushed frantically into the inferno, his mind screaming in constant agony, consumed by worry for everyone's safety. He shouted at the top of his lungs over the roaring flames, "It's me! It's Van! Is everyone okay?" Where is everyone? But only the crackling of burning wood and a terrifying hollow silence greeted him. Suddenly, a strange shape appeared in the distance on the grass, spotting a figure lying motionless in the field. Van rushed over hurriedly, lifting them up and demanding anxiously, "Hey, are you okay?" But the poor man was completely lifeless. On his back was a deep, gaping wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. Witnessing that fatal injury, Van's red eyes narrowed in sheer horror, his mind spinning into chaos. What is this? Just then, another brutal sight struck his vision, leaving him completely paralyzed. Ahead on a large, ancient tree hung 3 villagers' bodies. Dangling right above the raging fire, looking at their lifeless faces, Van could no longer contain his fury and shock. He screamed in agony, "What the hell is this?" The logic of an assassin helped Van try to analyze the situation. An attack by a band of robbers, but there's no reason for them to be this brutal. Absolute dread washed over him as he realized his mother and Lena were not here. Van ran madly through the sea of fire, praying incessantly, "Please just survive." Everything he had done, every bloody battle he had endured, was all for them. He only wanted to change this country, to turn this place into a home where his mother and sister could live in peace with smiles on their faces. Yet that hope shattered in an instant when Van ran to another large tree. Van's face went blank, his eyes wide with utter despair. Hanging limply from the branch in front of him was a figure all too familiar. Van stumbled forward, his legs feeling like lead, and let out a choked cry, "Mother!" But her body was already cold, her head slumped to one side, devoid of any warmth. Seeing his kind mother now, nothing more than a hollow shell, Van completely collapsed. Amidst the roaring flames and bottomless despair, a faint, breathless voice weakly echoed from behind, "Big brother." Van startled and turned around. In the windy field, his little sister Lena was sitting on the ground, her body covered in bleeding wounds. Van shouted in shock, "Lena!" But immediately after her frail body slumped to the ground, Van rushed over, caught her, pulled her into his arms, and frantically stammered, "Stay with me, what happened here?" Blood dripped from Lena's forehead down her small face as she wheezed, using her final strength to warn him, "Run! There are people looking for you, big brother." Lena's warning left Van completely stunned. His mind raced with a flurry of questions instantly surfacing. Are they targeting me? Are these the remnants of the Second Prince's faction? This can't be. Van hurriedly pulled Lena into his arms, his voice softening to reassure her. I know. Stop talking, sis. I'm getting you to safety right now." But fresh blood from Lena's body kept dripping, staining the cold ground crimson. Watching the pool of blood spread, Van's face turned deathly pale. He realized the gravity of the situation. With this much blood loss, his sister was fading in his arms. Lena's lips trembled as she whispered, "You know, I've gotten really good at cooking, haven't I?" Her words triggered a warm memory of them cooking with their mother. Van choked up. Why are you talking about that now?" Lena smiled gently, tears mixing with the blood on her face. "I just really wanted you to taste my cooking, big brother." Van's chest tightened, agonizing over his own helplessness. Watching the life of his loved one slowly slip away, Lena weakly raised a blood-stained hand to stroke her brother's cheek and murmured, "Big brother, please. Don't blame yourself. It's not your fault." Before she could finish, her small hand slid off his cheek and fell limp. She had taken her final breath. Van clutched his sister's lifeless body, crying out in despair, "Lena, no!" Just then, a cold blade suddenly pierced through Van's chest from behind. Cheers of triumph erupted, shattering the tragic silence. "Well done. As expected of the Royal Guard, we've taken down Van, the leader of the rebel army." The soldiers in iron armor circled around, celebrating as if they'd done something righteous. Van was still kneeling on the ground, his arms locked tight around his sister's cold body. The knight who had struck him coldly pulled his blood-soaked sword out. He looked down at this defeated man and asked, "Are you still not down yet?" Van slowly looked up, blood spilling from the corner of his mouth, his eyes glowing a fierce red. "Let me ask you one last thing." Seeing this, the knight in silver armor asked suspiciously, "You let my last attack hit you on purpose, didn't you?" Van remained silent. The crushing pain had extinguished every shred of his will to live. There was nothing left, nothing in this world, left that I want to live to protect anymore. Seeing the once famed assassin now looking like a hollow shell, the silver-clad knight raised his sword, feigning pity. How pathetic. At least let me give you a merciful death. Van bowed his head, his voice hoarse and hollow. Let me ask one more thing. Why must we die? Who gave this order? The knight chuckled faintly beneath his helm, nonchalantly revealing the cruel truth. That was the sacred decision of His Highness. A race without magic, the Ganda, is unnecessary for this kingdom. The shocking news left Van frozen. His eyes widened, blood gushing from his mouth as he screamed in a frenzy, "You're lying! You would never say such things!" "Are you finally finished?" A familiar voice suddenly echoed from behind, cutting through Van's screams. Stepping out from the flickering flames of the burning village was a man with golden hair. With cold blue eyes, he slowly approached and smiled. "Greetings, Van." Seeing the face of the newcomer, Van was completely stunned, his red eyes contracted, in total shock. It was Henry, the dear friend with whom he had just sworn an oath under the full moon. 2 rows of armored royal guards immediately dropped to their knees. They bowed respectfully to the kingdom's new master. Henry walked past them, nonchalantly looked down at Van clutching his sister's corpse, and spoke with icy mockery. "You're quite late. I've been waiting until I'm exhausted. I get it, you must have been busy buying souvenirs, right? After all, it's been a long time since you last came home." Witnessing the cruel, true face of the friend he once trusted with his life, Van's hope and faith shattered completely. He could only choke out questions in hopeless despair. Why would you do this?" Henry looked at Van with cold eyes and calmly replied, "It's all because of you, Van." He began to explain that an assassin who couldn't be detected by any magic sensors, someone who could infiltrate anywhere and take down mages with raw physical strength born of a race without magic, that person was a monster. Both of you were extremely dangerous threats to the kingdom's peace. Therefore, wiping out the entire race was the only option. Van sobbed, clutching his sister's body tightly. Realizing he had been deceived for so long, Van crumbled. However, Henry only offered a cruel smile, declaring he would still keep his promise. From today on, discrimination against the Ganda tribe will disappear completely from this kingdom, because the very existence of the Ganda will be wiped out entirely. The silver-clad knight roared and swung his sword, aiming to finish off the dying Van. But suddenly, a blood-covered hand shot up, gripping the sharp blade. The knight gasped in sheer shock, with eyes burning blood-red and filled with killing intent, blood pouring from his mouth. Van gritted his teeth and roared in hatred, "I'll kill you, Henry!" The burst of power from a man who seemed on the brink of death left the knight completely stunned. Henry looked at Van and commented calmly, "You really are a monster." He began to accumulate a brilliant aura of light magic around himself. The royal guards panicked, scrambling to shield their new king, shouting in a panic, "Protect His Majesty!" ignoring the fatal wound in his chest. Van poured his strength into his legs, kicking off the ground and launching himself forward like a wind-swept arrow. Van channeled his final remnants of power, activating the ultimate secret technique of the Ganda tribe. His fist, gathering all his hatred and despair, was covered in a burning red aura as he charged straight at the traitor, facing the desperate attack. Henry remained cold. He instantly conjured a magic circle and unleashed his ultimate light skill, Lucis Sagittarius Arrow of Light. The 2 massive forces collided, creating a terrifying explosion. As the smoke cleared, it left behind ruins and the corpses of the royal guards scattered everywhere. Van remained standing amidst the cold night. Henry looked at his old friend and murmured, lost in thought, "Even to this extent? So you're still fighting while protecting a corpse? That's just like you." Henry continued, standing tall with a cold, proud defiance, even as a massive gaping wound tore through his left chest, blood gushing out and soaking his shirt. "Even in death, you refuse to kneel before the magic clan, do you?" Henry let out a soft sigh. "You really are stubborn to the very end. Such a fool. Goodbye, Van." Then Hanzo turned coldly and walked away, leaving Van's silhouette behind. Standing motionless beside his sister's body, he whispered one final lingering thought. You were just too strong, that's all." With his strength completely drained, Van collapsed onto the cold ground. His crimson eyes slowly closed, ending a life filled with tragedy and sorrow in the endless darkness as Van's consciousness began to sink into the abyss of death. Suddenly, a mysterious creature, a giant wolf with fiery red eyes, appeared beside his cold body, letting out a low, regretful growl. After waking from such a long slumber, I cannot let you end it all here. My vengeance has yet to be settled. Looking down at the poor assassin, the wolf sighed. Carrying this burden is truly exhausting, then whispered, I will give you one more chance. Next time, do better. Instantly, a surge of crimson energy like lightning engulfed Van's entire body. Van slowly opened his eyes. Brilliant sunlight streaming through the wooden window made him squint. He looked around in a daze, wondering to himself, am I still alive? Looking down at his small hands and scanning the surroundings, Van was full of suspicion. Where is this? This place looks so familiar. Just then, a small figure bounded down the wooden stairs, rushing toward him and calling out, Big brother, you're finally awake, seeing that familiar face. Van was completely shocked. He choked out in disbelief. Lena, you're still alive. Contrary to her brother's emotional outburst, Lena just stared at him blankly and nagged, Big brother, what are you talking about? Are you still half asleep? The reality of everything around him made Van confused, wondering if he was dreaming. Lena put her hands on her hips and urged, Goodness, go wash your face already. Mom has prepared a huge feast to celebrate. Today is your birthday, big brother. Just then, Van's mother emerged from the kitchen, still holding a ladle, and smiled gently. That's right, Van. Wake up, dear. You're 15 years old today. Van stood there, completely stunned. He realized in a daze that he had returned to the past 15 years ago. Under the clear blue sky of the valley, Mom and Lena were laying out a picnic blanket on the grass. The lush green meadow was vibrant. Van's mother spoke happily. It would be such a waste to stay indoors on such a beautiful day, wouldn't it? Lena excitedly chimed in, The weather today is truly perfect. Looking at the peaceful scene before him, Van was still in shock. He quietly wondered if he had just experienced a long dream. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind swept through the valley, carrying flower petals across the sky, making Lena cheer in delight. Wow! Standing to catch the breeze in the middle of the hill, Van reached out and easily caught a petal floating in midair with lightning-fast reflexes. Seeing his brother's flash-like movement, Lena stared, completely awestruck. That's amazing! But that instinctive action made Van's heart sink. He realized this was definitely not a dream. No, this was reality. Every martial arts technique he had, to the absolute peak in his previous life, was still perfectly ingrained in this body. The acrid smell of his village burning, Lena's final dying words, and the bone-chilling pain as Henry's blade pierced through his left chest, all those brutal memories were screaming that his past life was real. Looking at his trembling hands, Van knew that the tragedy had truly happened. Seeing her brother standing there dazed, Lena asked worriedly, Big brother, is something wrong? Van quickly gathered his thoughts and offered a small smile. It's nothing. Just then, Van's mother called out from behind, All right, everything is ready. The picnic blanket was spread with a feast of delicious dishes. Van approached, looked at the spread, and whispered, It looks so good. The three of them gathered warmly together. Lena beamed, Happy birthday, big brother, while Van was enjoying those peaceful moments with his family in another corner of the kingdom. 3 figures on horseback were galloping wildly through the dense forest. Leading the group was a female mage with long black hair and stern green eyes, watching the scenery move rapidly through the leaves. She inwardly sighed with bitterness, thinking about how the academy had to mobilize students for this mission. Sensing her hesitation, the white-armored soldier riding alongside bowed his head in apology. Forgive me, ma'am. We couldn't find any other A-rank mages or hire elsewhere. Hearing this, the black-haired mage questioned sternly, What the hell are the knights doing? If the villagers are harmed, we won't be able to escape criticism for our negligence. But the white-armored soldier just shrugged it off carelessly. You don't need to worry about that. He pointed toward the misty valley ahead and explained, That place ahead is the Gonda Autonomous Region. Looking at the peaceful village under the mist, the mage looked doubtful. The white-armored soldier then flashed a sinister smile beneath his helmet and said with utter contempt, You should have learned this at the Magic Academy, shouldn't you? Those people aren't human beings, they're just livestock. His cold, cruel words left the mage completely silent. Her eyes narrowed in deep thought. Not letting her react, the soldier spurred his horse ahead. Regardless, let's hurry up. Anyway, hurry it up. Meanwhile, during the family picnic, the atmosphere was incredibly warm. Van slowly scooped up a spoonful of hot soup and brought it to his mouth. The familiar taste spread, making him smile slightly to himself. What a nostalgic flavor, he murmured. Hearing that Van's mother, who was sitting next to him, asked in surprise, "Huh, Mom just made this for you a few days ago, dear." "Right," Van said, slightly startled. "Ah ha ha, it's just that I like it so much." Just then, little Lena playfully lunged from behind, wrapped her arms around her brother's shoulders, and beamed with pride. "Hey, I helped cook it too, you know." Hearing this, Van glanced at the soup pot and teasingly replied, "Is that so? No wonder the ingredients in the pot are all chopped unevenly." Her brother's joke immediately made Lena blow a fuse. She puffed up her cheeks and stomped her feet. "What did you say?" Watching his two children bicker. Van's mother sighed helplessly, yet her eyes remained filled with tenderness. Returning to the peaceful reality, Van looked up at the deep blue sky, his heart filled with heavy thoughts. Have I really returned to the world of 15 years ago? Have I truly been given a chance to start all over again? But a bigger question weighed on his mind. What should I do now, suddenly? His mother's warm voice interrupted his train of thought. "Van," he started and turned back to see her looking at him with concern. "Are you still worried about that?" Van looked blank. "Yeah." Men of the Ganda tribe had to decide their own path at age 15. With no father and no family inheritance, he only had 3 choices. The first was manual labor for low wages in Ganda town. The second was to leave the town and throw himself into dangerous backbreaking work, under the contempt of the magic tribe. And the final choice was to become a mercenary. Even though the Ganda tribe had absolutely no magic power, many possessed incredibly strong physiques. Furthermore, thanks to their trait of being undetectable by magic, they could excel as scouts. However, when the kingdom went to war with neighboring countries, Ganda mercenaries were always the first to be pushed to the front lines. In the end, they were just cannon fodder for the regular army, but if they were lucky enough to survive, they would receive very generous rewards. His mother gently hugged him and spoke tenderly. "Mom isn't saying being a mercenary is bad. The reason our family has food and clothes is because of the money your father earned on the battlefield. But you are my only son, and the Ganda mercenary casualty rate is very high." He listened to his mother in silence. That's right, despite the danger, many chose this path to survive. In his past life, he had also become a mercenary despite his mother's objections, and it was on that very path that he had met Henry. Right at that moment, a loud, urgent alarm bell suddenly rang out, shattering the peaceful atmosphere of the picnic. His whole family jumped in surprise. The bell from the town's watchtower echoed incessantly. His expression shifted instantly, and his mind went into high alert. "Oh no! How could I have forgotten about this?" Seeing his terrifying expression, Lena asked in confusion, "Brother, what's going on?" With no time to explain, he zoomed off in a flash, only having enough time to shout back, "Lena, Mom, both of you absolutely do not go near the town right now." His mother panicked and called after him, "Wait, where are you going?" But his silhouette had already vanished behind the trees. A fanatic cried out, "Impurity is a sin. You must purge the impurity and protect the pure bloodline." The fanatical screams of a man holding a torch echoed everywhere. He rolled his eyes back and frantically declared that the Magic Kingdom was harboring a disgusting impurity, and that was the Ganda tribe. To them, impurity was born from darkness and would only bring more darkness. The one spreading this terror was the Purification Cult, an extremist heretical group excommunicated by the church. One of their brutal dogmas was that the non-magic Ganda people were servants of the devil, and that exterminating them was the truth. On Van's 15th birthday in his past life, after being expelled from the capital, this cult had fled to the Ganda Autonomous Region. This place only had nominal autonomy and absolutely no defensive forces. They easily swarmed in and massacred people, committing barbaric acts in the name of cleansing. At that time, Van was just a weak kid who could only tremble and hold on tightly to his mother and sister, hiding in a dark corner watching the villagers being murdered. But now, with the soul of a reincarnated ultimate assassin, everything was completely different. His red eyes flashed with cold, killing intent. "I'll take them all out myself." Van moved as fast as lightning, leaping over crumbling walls and closing in from above without making a sound. Down below, the bald man holding the torch was still shouting wildly, demanding to purge the town. He cruelly pressed the burning flame to the face of a crying Ganda girl. "Don't be afraid, Ganda. This is the cleansing fire that washes away sin." Just then, Van dove straight down from the air. The basic tactic when dealing with magic users is to strike. unexpectedly out of their line of sight and move fast. The top priority targets were always the brain, the cervical vertebrae, or the spinal cord. Just destroying those parts would kill them before they could cast a spell. With no wasted motion, Van closed in from behind and coldly snapped the bald man's neck, killing him instantly without even a whimper. The cult's subordinates heard the sound and turned around only to stand completely frozen in shock. Before them stood Van's back towering beside the cold corpse of their leader. The cult members immediately fell into a panic at the sudden death of their leader. One of them roared in anger, "You bastard!" Immediately he closed the distance from behind and silently sent him to his grave, leaving him only enough time to let out a pained cry before collapsing to the ground. Van quickly assessed the combat situation. Only magic-infused weapons can pierce their magical defenses. If I don't have one, I'll use their own weapons. Just then, another mage from behind suddenly chanted and unleashed a violent bolt of purple lightning. Lightning! Van nimbly dodged the attack by a hair's breadth, making the mage exclaim in shock, "What?" Not giving his opponent time to react, Van closed in for close-quarters combat. Van's powerful punch sent the mage flying back headfirst into the ground unconscious. Seeing the remaining ones, trembling in fear at his terrifying physical strength, Van coldly calculated 3 left. But from the archway, a loud, threatening shout suddenly rang out, "Stop right there!" I turned back and saw an enemy holding a blade to the throat of a Gonda girl, using her as a hostage. The kidnapper glared and barked, "Get on your knees, you little demon brat! If you don't obey me, I'll kill this woman." Looking at the sharp blade pressed against the girl's neck, Van gritted his teeth in hatred. Damn it, there were still more of them outside the square. He quickly analyzed the dire situation. Dealing with them wouldn't be a big deal, but if he surrendered, he would definitely be killed. The kidnapper coldly pressed the blade closer to the poor girl's neck. He sneered, threatening them and telling the girl to blame that silver-haired brat for her fate. Seeing the hostage's life hanging by a thread, Van panicked and shouted for him to stop. To ensure the girl's safety, he decided to raise his hands in surrender. The kidnapper wore a sinister, smug smile, thinking Van knew his place, and immediately signaled his subordinates to attack. One enemy rushed forward and delivered a brutal kick to Van. To keep the hostage safe, Van didn't fight back at all, accepting the blow and being kicked to the ground. His anger over his fallen comrades made the Purge cult thugs go wild, raining down a barrage of kicks on Van's body as he curled up on the cold ground. Seeing his minions lost in their rage, the kidnapper behind the hostage grew impatient and urged them to finish Van off. But the one attacking waved him off, wanting to make Van suffer agonizing pain to avenge those who had died. Just then, a sudden chill ran down their spines, looking into Van's glowing red eyes radiating terrifying killing intent. The kidnapper suddenly saw a giant demonic wolf, bearing its fangs right behind him. Pure terror made him tremble and scream for them to kill Van immediately despite his comrades' confusion. The kidnapper shoved the girl aside and lunged with his knife to finish Van off. But just as he stepped forward, the black-haired female mage's freezing spell was instantly activated. A bone-chilling frost quickly covered and locked the kidnapper's body, leaving him only enough time to scream in pain and panic before being frozen solid. The black-haired mage and her royal guard unit arrived. She coldly warned the others not to move if they didn't want their bodies to shatter into icy shards. She declared firmly that the fanatic's rampage was over, and in the name of the kingdom's justice, she would arrest them all. The sudden arrival of reinforcements from the capital shocked the remaining Purge cult members. Even Van couldn't help but be stunned, a huge doubt forming in his heart, because in his past life it should have taken much longer for reinforcements to arrive. The frozen enemy tried to scream orders for his men to kill the girl, but it was too late. In an instant, all the remaining enemies were frozen, completely into motionless ice statues. The black-haired mage walked over coldly, reminding them it was all over, and ordered her soldiers to quickly confiscate their weapons. Watching the fanatics being led away, Van was still in shock, just sitting on the ground with his mouth agape. The black-haired mage approached Van, gave a gentle, friendly smile, and unexpectedly thanked him. Her initiative caught Van off guard, and he asked, "Thanking me?" The mage explained, pointing to the fire-type mage lying unconscious in the distance, that with that man's power, he could have reduced the whole town to ashes. She admitted she was at a loss on how to handle that threat to minimize casualties, acknowledging she couldn't necessarily defeat him alone. But she wanted to avoid civilian casualties as much as possible. so Van's sudden move to take down the fire-type leader had helped her immensely. Hearing this, it dawned on Van that his change to history was what made the kingdom's army act faster than in his past life. The mage happily asked if Van wanted a reward for his contribution, but he immediately refused, insisting that she was the one who saved everyone and sincerely thanked her. The mage smiled and introduced herself as Helen. Right after that, Helen unexpectedly reached out, looked Van in the eyes, and made an unbelievable offer. "Then why don't you come to the Magic Academy?" The sudden invitation left Van frozen. His red eyes widened in extreme astonishment. The Magic Academy." Helen slowly explained that the Magic Academy was a prestigious boarding school founded by a three-nation alliance. It was built to find and cultivate outstanding talents. She added that whether one was a commoner or a foreigner, as long as they passed the entrance exam, they could rightfully enroll. Hearing this, Van fell silent. He wasn't unfamiliar with this place at all, because in his past life he had heard of the academy countless times. It was the cradle that trained warriors honored as heroes and countless legendary archmages of the continent. Van looked at Helen and asked directly, "Why me?" Helen was silent for a moment, glanced at the royal guards around them, and suggested, "Let's find somewhere private to talk." Before Van could react, she suddenly grabbed his hand and pulled him along, leaving the assassin stuttering as he was dragged away. "Hey, where are you taking me?" Helen turned back and smiled playfully. "Who knows, you lead the way. This is my first time in this village," guided by Van. The two walked along a small path deep into the forest and finally stopped at a pristine, quiet stream. Van looked around and spoke up. "It's quiet enough. That's what you wanted, right? I don't think anyone can eavesdrop on our conversation here." Standing in the middle of the empty forest, Helen suddenly turned back with a mysterious smile. She whispered, "That's right here. No one would notice if someone lost their life, right?" Instantly, a massive, glowing blue magic circle flared to life at her feet. This sudden change left Van startled. Without a moment's hesitation, Helen drew her magic bow and cast Lacy Sajita. An ice arrow shot straight at Van, but in the blink of an eye, Van had vanished from her sight and was standing right behind her. This incredible agility stunned Helen. Good heavens, was that footwork wave sliding? No, there was absolutely no magical fluctuation. She realized that with pure physical technique alone, Van had broken her line of sight and stepped straight into her blind spot. Van quickly grabbed Helen's arm, his eyes glowing with intense power as he coldly demanded, "Cut this charade out." Helen softly asked why he thought it was all a farce, to which Van calmly replied, "If I wasn't acting, what was the point?" Hearing this, Helen chuckled with amusement. "Ha ha! You talk just like a battle-hardened veteran. At your age, just what in the world have you been through?" Van pondered the question and asked, "Are you testing me?" Helen openly admitted, "I have a personality that likes to verify important things for myself." "You truly possess the power to fight mages using only pure physical combat." Facing that compliment, Van coldly replied, "So what if I do?" Helen looked straight into Van's eyes and sincerely stated, "This may sound sudden, but I think if you come to the academy, you could change the current situation of the Gonda tribe, right?" Her offer startled Van. He pondered for a moment and asked, "Don't tell me you're talking about a knighthood." Helen was surprised that Van knew about it. She smiled and nodded. "That's right. With your abilities, you are fully qualified to receive an academy knighthood, a special honor bestowed upon students who achieve exceptional results during your time studying there. The special thing is that those who receive this title, regardless of how lowly their background may be, have the right to establish a new noble house within the kingdom," Helen explained further. "The territory granted with a knighthood is usually a region closely linked to that person. You would certainly be granted the town of Gonda." This revelation left Van completely stunned. His mind spun like a pinwheel. The option had actually crossed his mind before. Unlike his past life, he was currently still young enough to take the entrance exam. But Van sighed softly, looked Helen straight in the eyes, and said seriously, "I have 3 questions." Helen smiled with interest. "All right, let's hear them." The two sat down by the large tree roots in the quiet forest. Van started with his first question. "First, this exam definitely requires a letter of recommendation from a kingdom noble." Before he could finish his sentence, Helen laughed heartily and confidently interrupted, "Of course I'll take care of that." Helen smiled with satisfaction as she saw Van starting to care. I'm very glad you seem interested. So what is your next question? Deep down, he was still skeptical. Could someone completely without magic like him really receive a knighthood from a magic academy? He looked up at Helen and spoke bluntly. That's a rather strange story. But what do you think about it? Helen giggled and admitted, it is indeed. Faced with Van's silence, she thoughtfully explained further. But those who have earned a knighthood in the past all have one thing in common. They have transcended tradition and touched upon a new magical principle. That could be great research on magic circles or the invention of new types of magical potions. The use of mana is not the only principle of magic. Controlling and defeating mages without relying on mana, there is no reason why your way of existence wouldn't be worthy of receiving a knighthood. Helen leaned in closer, her gaze filled with implication. As long as you can make everyone recognize that ability. But you know, Van sighed to himself. He didn't understand it very well, but it wasn't impossible, and it all depended on him, didn't it? He shook his head slightly. Fine, whatever. Van took a serious tone, aiming his cold gaze at Helen to pose his final question. Then the last question, what is your goal? Using a noble title as bait, what kind of scheme are you plotting to make me do for you? Helen was silent for a moment and then asked, Don't you trust me? Van replied bluntly. If I become the Lord of Gonda, I want to know what benefit that brings you. Faced with his questioning, Helen smiled mysteriously. There is a benefit, but it will be a long time before I ever feel like telling you. Confronted with that evasive answer, Sir Van's red eyes narrowed in thought. Both fell silent amidst the sound of the babbling brook. Just then, a shrill voice from high above suddenly rang out, breaking the tense atmosphere. Big brother! From the hillside, his younger sister Lena was rushing down. She asked anxiously, What are you doing in a place like this? Van was startled and turned around hastily, trying to act casual. No, actually, it's nothing. But Lena immediately jumped up, sulking. What do you mean, nothing? I heard that Big Brother fought the bad guys all by himself. Seeing his little sister worrying about him, Van smiled gently to reassure her. I'm sorry for making you worry. I'm fine. Contrary to her brother's explanation, Lena puffed out her cheeks in a huff and suddenly rushed over to hug Van tightly in her arms. Lena shyly scolded him, Big brother, you always say you're fine, and then you go off and do reckless things. Lena buried her face in her brother's chest and sobbed. Do you know how worried Mom and I were? Witnessing that warm scene, Helen smiled softly and spoke up to persuade Van. You don't have to trust me, but if you receive the knighthood, you will be able to protect your younger sister. Protecting your family with those legal rights, that is the truth. I swear it under the name of Helen Steinest. Finishing her sentence, Helen turned and walked away. Her silhouette gradually faded down the windy path. Van silently watched her go, then reached out to pat his little sister's head to comfort her. The following days passed extremely quickly. When their mother heard that Van had fought the purist faction alone, she was incredibly sad and worried. However, after hearing the sincere words of thanks from the townspeople Van had saved, the anxiety on their mother's face gradually disappeared. Seeing her son being respected by everyone, his mother smiled happily, stroked his hair, and showered him with praise, saying, You are truly your father's son, you've done so well. Van looked at his mother's proud smile. He decided to share Helen's offer with his family. When they heard he wanted to attend the Royal Academy, his mother and Lena's eyes went wide and they said in unison, A school in the capital! Sitting at the familiar dining table, Van slowly explained, It seems even people of the Gonda tribe can enroll. He began to tell his mother and younger sister about the knighthood, and about the admission nomination letter. Helen had promised to prepare for him. Upon hearing Van's decision, Lena spoke up anxiously. But you'll be surrounded by magic users, won't you? Van smiled slightly and replied with confidence. That's exactly why I can show those magic users that we Gonda people are not inferior to anyone. Deep down, Van understood how important this decision was. He had thought about this for many days but couldn't find any other path to save everyone. The path of an assassin in his past life only had meaning when he walked alongside Henry. But in this life, there's no way he's teaming up again. Even so, he couldn't confront the entire kingdom alone without a concrete plan. Even though he didn't fully understand Helen's true intentions, if he accepted her invitation, a new path would surely open. He had already died once, so no matter how thorny or dangerous the path ahead might be, as long as there is even a glimmer of hope, he was determined to move forward. Van braced his hands on this table and declared firmly, I want to eliminate the discrimination against the Gonda tribe from this country. Van's powerful and ambitious declaration left both his mother and Lena completely stunned and speechless. His mother opened her eyes wide, looking at the son who had truly grown up. After a moment of contemplation, his mother sighed softly and said gently, "It seems that even if I tried to stop you, you wouldn't listen, would you?" Van's mother smiled helplessly. "That stubbornness of yours is definitely inherited from our family." Van lowered his eyes and replied softly, "Thank you, Mom." However, the emotional atmosphere was quickly dampened when his mother suddenly changed her tone and asked a very practical question. "Hey, have you considered the exam fees and tuition yet?" The sudden question made Van freeze cold sweat dripping down. "Huh!" His mother propped her chin on her hand, a cunning smile on her face. "Listen, school isn't free, you know." Only then did Van panic, realizing he had been careless. "Oh no, I completely forgot about that." His mother sighed. "Good heavens, I don't know what to do with you." "All right, I'll find a way to manage the money." Hearing his mother say that, Lena immediately raised her fist excitedly and declared, "Then I'll go to work. I'll support you, brother." Van panicked and stopped his sister. Wait, I can't let you do that." He clutched his head in worry, thinking, "Should I go make money myself? But in this Gonda place, where can you find a good job that pays well?" However, the money problem was resolved surprisingly easily. A bag full of gold coins was suddenly placed right in front of Van. Van asked, confused, "Where did this money come from?" His mother explained casually, "This is the reward for destroying the purification cult. Didn't I tell you that?" All worries about tuition were finally lifted. The departure day arrived. Under the shade of their small house, his mother kindly tucked Van in. "Van, I need to tell you this. In the city, there will be people who treat you cruelly just because you are of the Gonda tribe. You will have to endure a lot, but you must never feel inferior. Live with your head held high." She looked at her son with affection. "You have always been my greatest pride and joy." Van looked at his mother with a determined gaze and smiled slightly. "I will try my best." Lena also chimed in from behind, radiant. "When you come back, I'll make the mushroom soup you love the most." "Thank you," he said, gently stroking his sister's hair. "I'm really looking forward to it." Van put his backpack on his shoulders. "Then I'm off." Standing from afar, his mother and Lena waved goodbye continuously. Watching the figures of his two loved ones still safe and sound, Van whispered to himself, "This time, I will definitely keep my promise." He strode under the deep blue sky, leaving behind the painful memories of his past life to head toward a new future. After a long journey, Van finally reached his destination. Before his eyes appeared an academy as magnificent and splendorous as a fairy tale castle. It was built surrounding a giant ancient tree emitting a mystical light. At this moment, other candidates were busily lining up to enter. A noble young master stepped forward, confidently presenting himself. "Alexis von Hohenberg, I have a recommendation letter from my father, Lord Hohenberg." The guard immediately bowed respectfully. "Yes, please come in, sir." Right after that was another noble young lady, Elizabeth Krusner, with a recommendation letter from Marchioness Lawson-Burke. The guard also bowed extremely respectfully. "It's a great honor to welcome you, my lady. Please follow this way." Watching everyone pass by one after another, Van whispered to himself, "It's my turn now." But just as he stepped forward, a loud, angry shout suddenly rang out. "Hey, what do you think you're doing there, huh?" Van was startled and stopped. His appearance with silver hair and fiery red eyes quickly attracted the attention of the surrounding crowd. Whispers of disdain began to break out. "Those red eyes. Is he from the Gonda tribe? Why would a Gonda guy appear in a place like this? How filthy." Hearing the familiar chant of contempt, Van sighed in frustration. Here we go again with this kind of treatment. Facing the guard, who was seething with murderous intent, Van calmly explained, "I didn't do anything. I'm just a candidate here to take the exam." The guard's eyes widened in anger upon hearing this. "Take the exam? Do you know where you are standing, huh?" Van replied calmly, "The Royal Academy, right? I heard that anyone can participate in the exam regardless of status." Van's answer immediately enraged the guard. He went berserk, swinging his spear and pointing it straight at Van's neck as if to finish him off. "What exam are you talking about? A pathetic Ganda like you thinks he can reach for the stars." Watching the sharp spear tip pressing against his neck, Van slightly lowered his eyes, lost in thought. It was so annoying. For Van, neutralizing these guards by force would be child's play. However, he quickly restrained himself, knowing that if he caused a scene here, he wouldn't even have a chance to take the entrance exam. Just as the tension escalated, a calm, steady voice cut through the air. "Stop right there." Another guard stepped forward and grabbed his comrade's shoulder. He sternly reminded him that bloodshed was strictly prohibited in front of the examinees. Seeing this, the aggressive guard had to lower his spear. Van breathed a small sigh of relief, thinking to himself, "Finally, someone with a lick of sense shows up." Still, the guard from before clicked his tongue in annoyance and muttered, "Every year there are a few delusional idiots like this." Watching the guard's attitude, Van sighed with weariness. What a pain. The guard then leaned in closer to Van's face and declared, "Listen clearly, the Academy does not discriminate based on social status, but this exam strictly requires a letter of recommendation from a nobleman of the kingdom." Hearing this, Van calmly replied, "I have one." His firm statement made the guard's expression change instantly. "What?" Van unhurriedly took out a scroll tied neatly from his belongings. He held it up in front of the guard and said, "I have a complete letter of recommendation sealed by a nobleman of this kingdom." Looking closely at the exquisite purple wax seal on the scroll, the guard was completely stunned. However, his arrogance and prejudice quickly overpowered his reason. He roared in anger, "You bastard! Enough of this nonsense! What noble would ever recommend a Gonda like you?" After saying that, he roughly snatched the letter of recommendation from Van's hand and shouted, "Hand it over!" Faking a noble's seal is a serious crime. Van's gaze instantly hardened. His crimson eyes flashed with a cold, sharp glint. Before the guard could even react, Van had tossed him aside with one hand in a split second. Suddenly losing his balance, the guard crashed to the ground to the shock of the surrounding examinees. He lay on the ground confused, not understanding what had just happened. The guard, his colleague standing nearby, looked down in disbelief and asked, "How did you just fall like that?" "No, wait, that brat did something very strange. What is all this noise?" A warm but authoritative voice suddenly cut through the chaotic atmosphere. From within, a judge with light purple hair slowly stepped out. Seeing the appearance of the judge, the guard immediately turned pale, stammering in a panic. It's nothing serious, sir. It's just this Gonda." "Hey!" Ignoring the guard's explanation, the purple-haired judge turned his sharp gaze toward Van and asked, "And who are you?" Van faced him calmly and answered clearly, "I am an examinee Van Kruger recommended by Helen Stennis." Hearing the name Helen Stennis, the judge's expression shifted. He immediately took the recommendation letter to examine it thoroughly. Looking at the wax seal and the intricate family crest on the scroll, the purple-haired judge muttered in amazement, "This seal and crest, this is definitely from the Stennis family." The judge's attitude changed completely. He bowed politely and said to Van, "I sincerely apologize for the guard's rudeness. Please come inside." The sight of the judge bowing made the crowd of examinees gasp in shock. A wave of hushed whispers rippled through them. A letter of recommendation from the Stennis family. Who on earth is he? Even the two guards widened their eyes in disbelief as they watched Van's retreating back as he walked into the academy grounds. Van sighed softly, realizing that he was attracting far too much attention. What a pain. I'm drawing some strange attention. Glancing back at the judge who was still standing there, bowing to see him off, Van thought to himself, "Helen, you really are the final boss, aren't you?" Stepping into the academy's main hall, Van slowly observed his surroundings and silently assessed. "I see. This place is full of the elite." Suddenly, Van's gaze stopped on a young man with short orange hair standing in the distance. Memories from his past life instantly flooded his mind. That was Daichik, who would later become a legendary genius swordsman with powerful magical sword techniques. Looking at Daichik's figure at this moment, Van pondered, he already possesses a distinct aura even at this age. Van's eyes continued to scan the crowd and stopped on familiar faces. The first was a male student with moss-green hair who was intently reading a book. That was Chill, a great fire mage in the future. Not far away was a blonde-haired maiden with a saintly appearance, Lunaris, who would later become the saintess possessing supreme divine power. Looking at them at this moment, Van mused silently. So they were all graduates of this academy too. Unlike an assassin hiding in the shadows like him, they were all heroes of the kingdom, those who had achieved countless brilliant feats and gained fame across all the battlefields. Yet in the cruel battle for the throne, those proud heroes were eventually corrupted, becoming loyal pawns for corrupt princes, and their ultimate fate was to be finished off under Van's cold blade. Returning to reality, Van looked up at the deep blue sky, thinking to himself, in this life, I will have to compete fairly against those who always stand in the spotlight. He clenched his fist, his eyes filled with determination. It won't be easy, but if I can surpass them all, I will definitely be able to change the destiny of this kingdom. However, Van's line of thought was abruptly cut off by a rude, jarring shout from behind. "Hey, red-eyed freak!" Van turned around, confused, and asked, "Are you talking to me?" The brown-haired guy, aggressive, stepped closer and roared, "That's right. How does a guy like you dare to stand here so casually, huh?" Van maintained his calm attitude and gently replied, "Where I choose to stand is my own business, isn't it?" Van's indifferent answer instantly infuriated the brown-haired guy. He glared in anger. "You insolent brat! Do you have any idea who I am? A low-life Gonda, like you, dares to show your face at the academy that shapes the future of this kingdom." Facing the all-too-familiar insults, Van just let out a weary sigh, thinking to himself, here we go again. In his past life, he had grown far too accustomed to these kinds of things. Confronted with such bitter insults, a thought of giving up flickered in his mind. Perhaps it would be easier if he just bowed his head. But immediately the gentle advice of his mother echoed in his ears. "My son, you don't need to feel inferior. Live with your head held high." Not only his mother's voice, but memories from his past life also flooded back. "If you bow before those contemptuous stares, equality will never be reached. Carry yourself with your head held high." Van's hesitation was quickly extinguished, as the aggressive brown-haired student suddenly lunged forward, roughly grabbing Van by the collar and shouting, "Hey, did you hear what I said, you piece of trash?" Despite being grabbed so violently, Van's expression remained cold, not showing a hint of change. He silently looked straight at his opponent and muttered to himself, "You made the first move." Seeing the icy glint in Van's eyes, the brown-haired student suddenly felt a shiver and stuttered, "What?" Before his opponent could recover, Van offered a faint, mysterious smile. In a flash, he brought both hands up, gripping the man's wrists. In a split second, Van executed a subtle shift in his center of gravity, sending the brown-haired student crashing to the floor, leaving him in total bewilderment. That was jujutsu, the pinnacle of combat techniques that Van had painstakingly mastered. Instead of using force to resist an opponent's attack, the user aligns their own strength to manipulate and borrow the opponent's momentum to take them down. This technique was the same move Van used to send the guard tumbling at the school gate earlier. Everything happened so fast that the surrounding students could only stand there with their jaws dropped in shock. Standing tall and looking down at the pathetic figure on the ground, Van smiled politely, reached out his hand and calmly asked, feeling dizzy, "Let me help you up." But Van's kindness only deepened the brown-haired student's humiliation. He angrily swatted Van's hand away and roared with hatred, "You bastard!" I immediately jumped up and frantically activated a glowing green magic circle around himself to prepare a counterattack. Just as the conflict was about to explode, a deep, authoritative voice suddenly rang out from behind, "That is enough." The brown-haired student's magic aura was instantly extinguished. Everyone nearby jumped and turned to look. Even Van turned his head, filled with suspicion, seeing such a high-profile figure appear. The brown-haired student's expression shifted instantly, and he hurriedly bowed respectfully. "Prince Henry, Your Highness." Stepping out into the brilliant sunlight was the 9th Prince Henry, with his golden hair and incredibly noble demeanor. He walked over leisurely and immediately launched into a virtuous speech. "The Ganda tribe are also fellow companions of our kingdom. We should strive together, not oppose one another." The gentle yet weighty warning from the prince left the brown-haired student deeply embarrassed. He bowed in apology, looking quite ashamed. This is truly unseemly." Henry smiled warmly and waved his hand in a friendly manner. "There is no need to be so formal. Today I am just an examinee, just like everyone else. Please treat me normally." Saying that, Henry turned to cast a warm gaze toward Van and continued gently, "You as well." Watching Henry's back as he slowly walked away, Van stood completely frozen, cold sweat pouring down his pale face. So he also graduated from this academy. The appearance of the 9th Prince. Henry quickly stirred up the main hall. Whispers of admiration echoed everywhere. "That's the 9th Prince. Is he taking the entrance exam just like the rest of us? How fair he is, and he even shows tolerance toward the Gonda tribe. He is truly worthy of being called Your Highness. Standing from afar, watching Henry smiling kindly at everyone, Van fell into deep contemplation. He suddenly recalled a memory from his past life when Henry had once casually told him, "I once studied at a place called an academy." Back then, Van had asked in surprise, "Really?" It turned out he had been meticulously building the image of a prince of the people long ago. Cutting through Van's thoughts, Henry slowly approached wearing that familiar warm smile and calmly said, "You look a bit worried." He placed a hand on his chest and shared gently, "In truth, I feel the same way. The Academy's entrance exam is notoriously difficult." He held out his hand in a friendly gesture to encourage his new acquaintance. "But there is no need to be afraid. Let us do our best together as fellow examinees." Looking at the hand extended in front of him, Van's heart felt heavy. That smile, that warmth. Anyone who saw it would feel comfortable and naturally open their hearts. It was an incredibly warm smile, but to Van, who had tasted the bitter agony of betrayal down to his very bones, he knew the true nature hidden behind that fake smile all too well. That was the very person who had heartlessly ordered the massacre of his entire village, pushing the Gonda tribe toward extinction. A crimson, hateful killing intent suddenly flared in Van's eyes. His chest tightened with resentment, and in his mind he kept screaming, "At this very moment, I could definitely kill him right now." But an assassin's reason quickly pulled him back to reality. Van told himself, "But what would happen if I killed him right here? If he acted now, he would ruin everything." Van warned himself not to let his guard down. He had to keep in mind the real reason he decided to come to this academy. He clenched his fist until it trembled to suppress the rage ready to erupt. Seeing Van's strange reaction, Henry's expression shifted slightly, and he asked in confusion, "Is something the matter?" Without even looking at his enemy, Van turned his back and walked away coldly, waving his hand. "Don't worry about me." He walked straight ahead, leaving behind a heartless reply. "I have no intention of making friends." Van's cold, decisive attitude as he walked away left Henry standing still watching him. His coldness instantly fanned the flames of... The wave of outrage rose instantly as the surrounding candidates joined in hurling insults and demanding, "Who does he think he is acting like that in front of His Highness? Honestly, those low-class scum have absolutely no manners at all. They're nothing but wild beasts." The brown-haired student from earlier also gritted his teeth in fury. Just as the chaos reached its peak, a booming, authoritative voice cut through, silencing every whisper. "Silence!" The purple-haired examiner stepped forward and shouted to restore order. "The registration period for this year's entrance exam has officially closed. We will now lead you to the location for the practical exam, the Forest of Shadows." The mere mention of the Forest of Shadows made more than a few candidates break out in a cold sweat. Even Van glanced up at the towering ancient trees radiating a strange magical aura ahead, silently assessing the area with caution. The Forest of Shadows, huh? In the wide courtyard at the edge of the forest, all the candidates gathered. A middle-aged proctor with slicked-back brown hair and a long scar across his face stepped out. He spoke in a gravelly, deep voice. "Welcome to the Forest of Shadows. This will be the venue for this year's entrance exam. As you all know, the Academy is a place to nurture the exceptional talents who will lead the kingdom in the future. We don't have time to teach those who haven't even mastered the basics. Therefore, you must prove your bare minimum competence in this exam." Van stood silently in the crowd, listening intently to every word the proctor said. The old man continued to explain the exam rules. The Forest of Shadows is a unique land home to an incredibly potent source of magic. Your mission is to search for and retrieve a magic-infused flower called the Tear of Heaven, a bloom that only grows in one specific place, deep within this forest. Suddenly, the proctor's expression turned menacing. He warned in a low tone, "However, the creatures living in this forest also possess extremely powerful magic." He calmly sowed seeds of panic among the candidates, adding, "So you better prepare yourselves mentally." Van furrowed his brows in thought. He had assumed this would be a normal practical exam. "I didn't expect to have to fight magical beasts right away." The proctor continued to outline the crucial rules. Any act of obstruction or attacking fellow candidates is strictly prohibited. However, cooperation and assisting each other are permitted. But take note, for a team to pass the exam together, you must collect enough Tears of Heaven to match the number of members in your group. The old man smirked, implying something. "Forming groups that are too large will only bring you countless trouble and difficulties. The time limit for the exam is until sunset." Right then, the purple-haired examiner stepped up, held out a diamond-shaped golden badge and instructed, "Additionally, take this protection badge before entering the forest. In case of life-threatening danger, crush this badge and we proctors will appear immediately to rescue you." He narrowed his eyes and issued one final warning, but he added that requesting a rescue meant immediate disqualification. A moment later, the announcement boomed across the plaza. "The exam officially begins now. Enter the forest at your own pace and complete your objectives." Students quickly scrambled to find teammates to form support groups. A refined young man gently took a lady's hand. "If you permit me, it would be my honor to protect you." The girl smiled and replied, "How elegant." The more popular students were busy flirting. Two male students excitedly slapped each other on the shoulder, saying, "If you choose me as your partner, you won't have to fear anything." "Hey, still the same, aren't you?" Amidst the crowd bustling for teammates, Van stood quietly alone. He sighed to himself, "Well, so this is how it goes. But that's fine, too. Moving alone was easier." Van quietly approached the bearded proctor to receive his supplies. The proctor, with a long scar across his face, squinted at Van with a cold, scrutinizing silence. After a moment, he coldly held out a golden badge. "Here's yours." Taking the protection badge, Van turned decisively and walked straight into the deep, dark path of the forest alone. The moment. Van's silhouette disappeared behind the trees. A candidate peeked out from behind him wearing a sinister, calculating grin. Suddenly, a growl, deep and rumbling, shattered the silence. From the bushes, a massive creature with glowing turquoise fur and glowing red eyes slowly emerged. Before he could even finish his walk, he was blocked by a monster. Van frowned, staying alert. One appeared already. He quickly assumed a combat stance, calmly assessing the threat. "Looks like a medium-sized magical beast." Creatures possessing powerful innate magic were collectively known as magical beasts, tough and capable of using magic. These beasts were often more troublesome and difficult to deal with than average mages. The beast let out a roar that shook the earth, then charged at Van with terrifying speed. A thought flashed through his mind. "Thinking back, ever since I became an assassin in my previous life, I only ever fought humans." Facing the ferocious beast, Van immediately executed a secret anti-beast technique called cruising strike. Instead of generating instant impact force, this move focused on amplifying shockwaves. The waves of force generated by the strike would easily penetrate surface defenses and directly devastate the target's internal organs. It was a very difficult technique to land, if the opponent was highly alert, but it was perfect for dealing with mindless magical beasts. The giant creature collapsed to the ground, standing next to the motionless carcass. Van nonchalantly recalled his time as a mercenary in his past life when he and his comrades occasionally encountered magical beasts. On the march to a seasoned veteran, this kind of small fry was nothing more than child's play. He glanced toward the bushes behind him. Van thought to himself, "A pity for you all." He had quickly realized someone was tailing him, so he scratched his head naturally, pretending nothing had happened. Behind an ancient tree, two candidates trailing him were stunned by what they had just witnessed. The student with him stammered, "What the hell did he just do?" The wind element candidate beside him clicked his tongue in disdain. "Humph, he definitely used poison. A dirty method perfectly fitting for that filthy Ganda trash." Having only seen a few moves, they were quick to pass judgment. He began to gather brilliant green wind magic in his hand and declared confidently, "But those cheap tricks won't work against my rending gale magic." Seeing this, his companion nervously intervened. "Are you really going to do that? Interfering with someone else's exam is strictly forbidden. Did you forget?" But the wind mage just coldly replied, "That's just talk, only valid in theory." He grinned sinisterly and explained, "The examiners never intended to let any Gonda pass this exam anyway, especially someone who dared to show such rudeness to Prince Henry, so even if we kill him here, no one will bother to step up and blame or punish us." While this malicious plot was being hatched in another location deep below the dark basement of the kingdom, a hooded guard holding a storm lantern was respectfully guiding a mysterious figure down cold stone stairs. "Please, this way." They stopped before a giant iron gate sealed by a complex magic circle. The cloaked figure looked at the gate and commanded, "Good, give me the key." The mysterious cloaked figure in the dungeon was none other than the bearded proctor. He stood with a guard before the gate. Solid iron. The guard asked apprehensively, "Are you serious, sir?" The bearded proctor dismissively waved him off. "No need to be afraid. This creature is completely under the control of my beast-taming magic. He explained that the monster's only goal was to take out that Gonda brat who dared to set foot in here. He admitted, "True, according to Academy rules, we cannot refuse any candidate with a recommendation letter. But if there's a risk he passes, it would cause severe damage to the Academy's honor." He continued in a sinister tone. "Candidates like that are destined to meet with unfortunate accidents." Hearing this, the guard still looked worried. "But what if other candidates get caught up in it?" The bearded proctor replied coldly. "No problem at all. That Gonda is acting alone. There is no way any other candidate would voluntarily approach low-life Gonda trash." Having said that, he shoved the key into the lock and decisively turned it. The seals broke and the giant iron gate slowly opened, releasing a burst of energy as red as hellfire. The bearded proctor spread his arms wide and commanded maniacally, "Now go, O cursed beast, destroy that filthy Gonda, and protect the Academy's pride." From the darkness of the dungeon, a pair of bloodthirsty red eyes suddenly blazed to life. Meanwhile, in another corner of the dark forest, the purple-haired judge paces back and forth looking deeply troubled. He thinks to himself, "I've got a bad feeling about this year's exam." Just then, the examiner with the thick beard slowly approaches from behind and speaks up, "I'm back. Is there a problem?" The purple-haired judge turns around and replies, "Everything has been running smoothly so far. Where did you go while the exam was in progress?" The bearded examiner smirks wickedly and says, "Just preparing a little something for what's coming next." The vague answer makes the purple-haired judge narrow his eyes in suspicion, but he says nothing more. At that same moment, in another area, brilliant morning sunbeams pierce through the dense canopy. Van slowly walks past the glowing ancient bushes and suddenly his gaze stops in front of a vibrant blue cluster of flowers emitting a mystical aura. Van is overjoyed and concludes, "It matches the description perfectly." Looking at the stunning flowers before him, Van thinks to himself, "So this is the Tears of Heaven flower, huh? Once I pick this, I'm good to pass the exam." But just as he reaches out to pick them, his sharp assassin instincts immediately warn him of an unusual presence behind him. Van's lips curl into a knowing smirk, but before that, "Time for you guys to step out, don't you think?" From the shadows of the trees, two figures slowly emerge. Leading them is the arrogant brown-haired student from earlier. He wears a smug, contemptuous smile. "You noticed us, I guess. You Gondolot really do have noses as sensitive as dogs." Despite the insult, Van remains perfectly calm and replies with a slight smile. "It's not just that, it's experience. Cowards always try to approach from behind." In his heart, he mocks himself even though he has no right to say that. Given that in his past life, he was a professional assassin. The brown-haired student and his accomplice beside him immediately change their expressions. He roars angrily, "You won't be acting so cool for long. Someone like you doesn't deserve to be in this academy at all. We're going to prove it ourselves." Hearing those empty excuses, Van sighs in exasperation. "Drop the excuses. You were humiliated in front of everyone, so you want revenge. Isn't that the real reason you're here?" He coldly declares, "That petty, pathetic pride of yours. I'm going to knock it right out of your heads." Facing Van's confidence, the brown-haired student grinds his teeth in anger. Not a chance. He and his blue-haired accomplice immediately channel their magic. Brilliant green and yellow lights flare up around them. Van narrows his eyes. He reads his opponents instantly. A magic swordsman and a spell-casting mage, huh? In his head, he begins analyzing the situation to formulate a plan. According to Van's knowledge, the most optimal way to handle this combat styles using mana can be divided into three main categories. The most typical type is the spell-casting mage. Those who project mana outward in the form of magic spells. The second type is the magic swordsman who specializes in coating weapons with magic just to look cool. And the final type is the magic fighter. Those who only accumulate mana inside their bodies to focus on maximizing their physical strength. Forming a team by combining different combat styles is an extremely wise strategy. It helps them easily cover for each other's weaknesses. Looking at the two opponents in front of him working in perfect sync, Van understands that this will be a battle requiring careful calculation. The blue-haired student clicks his tongue in disdain. "You don't look like you have any experience with killing at all." Van lowers his eyes silently, evaluating, "But at least they have the guts to try and kill me." However, Van knows he cannot kill these two. In this world, if someone from the Gonda tribe like Van were to die, that death would easily be covered up as an accidental mishap during the exam. But if the child of a noble were to perish, their family would definitely mobilize all their forces to hunt down the perpetrator and seek revenge at any cost. The nobles of this country, those who expanded their territory through brutal wars, still retain the savage and warlike nature from those chaotic times. Furthermore, Van has promised himself that this time he will walk a completely new path, a life lived in the light of justice. Therefore, Van decides not to use any lethal assassin techniques. Instead, he will completely break their will to fight, forcing them to genuinely admit defeat. Looking into Van's piercing, determined red eyes, the blue-haired student suddenly feels a chill. I really hate those eyes. Damn Ganda. He roars and unleashes a move like something out of a martial arts movie, a wind blade slash. Sharp gusts of wind like invisible blades fly wildly toward Van. Van, having agilely detected the danger, immediately leans to dodge the attack by a hair's breadth. The blue-haired student clicks his tongue in disappointment when he sees his attack miss. Humph, you dodged a fatal blow. Pretty agile, aren't you? The blue-haired guy immediately boasts about his lineage. That's right. This is the wind-threading sky magic of the Witcher family to someone who has absolutely no mana to sense. Magic like yours, it becomes an invisible blade. He confidently spreads his arms, smirking provocatively. How about that, scared yet? If you get on your knees and beg for forgiveness right now, then... But before he could even finish his sentence, Van coldly cut him off with a sharp, biting remark. That magic is actually pretty convenient for the summer, isn't it? With a cocky smirk plastered on his face, Van landed another strike to his opponent's pride. Don't tell me the ManhwaCapped family's job is to provide a refreshing breeze for the royal palace, right? Van's mockery was like throwing gasoline on a fire. The blue-haired student snapped his face, turning beet-red eyes wide with rage as he shrieked, "I'm going to kill you!" He frantically poured every ounce of his mana into a massive ultimate attack. A storm stronger than anything before tore through the sky as his magic circle erupted violently, unleashing fierce whirlwinds. Razor-sharp gusts swept across the forest, blowing everything away. Yet amidst the chaotic storm, Van moved with fluid grace, activating a slick, near-impossible evasion. He closed in on his opponent with perfect precision, not getting a single scratch. Witnessing the impossible, the student stood there, mouth agape, cold sweat pouring down his face. He can actually see it, in the dim shadows of the forest. Van's red eyes suddenly glowed with a sinister light. He offered a cold, faint smile and replied casually, "Yes, of course I can see it. Your energy is literally leaking out everywhere. It's way too obvious." Before his opponent could react, Van unleashed a powerful blow, sending ManhwaCapped vomiting blood as he collapsed to the ground. Seeing his teammate taken down so easily, the mage Eisenbach grew furious and drew his sword. "You bastard, how dare you!" He activated reinforcement magic, coating his blade in brilliant yellow electricity. Van glanced at it and gave a blunt assessment, just basic reinforcement magic. In his head, Van quickly mapped out his tactics as long as he didn't touch the blade. Then it was really just an ordinary sword. The theory sounded easy enough, because a sword swing is usually 2 to 3 times faster than a punch. However, thanks to his lightning-fast footwork, Van closed the gap in an instant. Instead of trying to dodge the blade, he grabbed Eisenbach's wrist, directly twisting the angle of the attack and completely neutralizing it. Eisenbach barely had time to let out a cry of pain before collapsing to the ground. Seeing his comrade lying motionless, ManhwaCapped gritted his teeth in bitter frustration. "Damn you!" Van stood tall before the two defeated fighters. He asked coldly, "Still want to keep going? If you cross this line again, I won't be so gentle." That chilling warning drained all the fight out of ManhwaCapped. Terrified, he waved his hands, desperately pleading, I'm sorry." But before ManhwaCapped could finish begging, Van suddenly froze. He frowned, looking toward the bushes. Wait, something's not right. An assassin's keen instincts sounded a red alert. Van's expression shifted. I immediately shouted a warning to the two mages behind him. "You two get out of here right now!" Immediately after, a giant beast cloaked in brilliant red flames roared and lunged from deep within the forest. It was a hellsport, a brutal fire attribute beast. Van's red eyes narrowed in caution. ManhwaCapped and Eisenbach were frozen in sheer terror at the monster's appearance. In just 1 second of delay, the crazed beast lunged with terrifying force. The monster's powerful charge sent the two mages flying, causing them to scream in pain. Van was also shaken by the impact. He froze in shock, focusing all his senses ahead. Out of the smoke and blazing red flames, the giant beast was charging wildly. One look was all Van needed to know that this was a bad situation. A hell sport, a demon fang beast. The monster's appearance left the two mages in a complete panic, unable to understand why a high-level beast like that would appear in this forest. During this selection exam, the battle had barely begun, and it was already intense. The Hellsport, also known as the Cursed Talon, possessed a charge reinforced by a massive amount of mana. It had destructive power on par with siege magic. Realizing the extreme danger, Van turned and yelled at them, "If you can move, get out of here now!" But his warning was met only with helpless groans. Eisenbach painfully admitted that it was useless as he pulled up his pant leg. The violent collision earlier had seriously injured his leg. Eisenbach said helplessly, "I think my bone is cracked. Just standing up is my limit." Watching the monster seething with killing intent and preparing to charge, Van quickly analyzed his options. What do I do now? Carry them and run. With that monster's terrifying charge, just slowing down for 1 second means certain death. Plus this demon fang species, once they mark a target, they chase them to the end. They never give up. Van glanced down at the yellow protection badge on his hand, wondering if he should crush it to call for rescue. But would the rescue team arrive in time before the beast crushed them all? Just then Eisenbach spoke up, resigned. "Don't worry about me. You run for yourself." Vancha X gritted his teeth, clinging to his pride. "I am still a mage of the Vancha X family. I can handle this myself." Looking at his comrade, who was offering a helpless smile, Vancha X tried to talk him out of it. "Don't be stupid." But Eisenbach still struggled to stand, patting Vancha X's shoulder firmly. Running away and leaving a comrade behind would disgrace the Eisenbach family, witnessing their spirit. Van sighed. "You guys..." He immediately proposed a practical plan. Crush the badge and call for help. I'll help stall them until the rescue team arrives. But Eisenbach just smiled bitterly and retorted, "If we give up that easily, shouldn't we just feed our family's reputation to the dogs?" Vancha X nodded in agreement. "That's right. Better to suffer a tarnished family reputation than..." Eisenbach continued, and both of them gathered their remaining mana, standing up with steely determination. "Father, never seen anyone so eager to throw their lives away," Van muttered, witnessing their stubbornness. Van clicked his tongue in annoyance. "Cheap pride." His blunt words immediately infuriated Vancha X, who pointed a finger at him and shouted, "What did you just say, you bastard?" Van turned back, his red eyes boring into them as he roared, "If you want to fight, fight to win. Isn't that what true royal noble pride is all about?" Van's heavy words made Vancha X freeze. He clicked his tongue and muttered, "Arrogant Gonda brat." Just then, the massive Hell's Boss beast, engulfed in blazing red flames, roared and charged straight at them. Van decisively stepped in front, standing tall to face the monster and protect the two mages behind him. The bearded proctor looked up at the sky and muttered, "It's time." Seeing the old man's strange behavior, the purple-haired judge asked out of curiosity, "Time for what?" The old man waved him off with a forced smile. "Don't mind me, just thinking out loud. By the way, has any examinee crushed their badge to call for help yet?" The purple-haired judge shook his head. "Not yet. Everything has been very quiet so far." His answer made the bearded proctor smirk with satisfaction. "I see. Good, very good." He thought to himself. "It seems that brat won't even get a chance to call for backup." As it turned out, before the exam began, all the examinee's belongings had been confiscated. He had secretly stolen Van's, and he had the Hell's Beast smell it to lock onto Van's scent. He gloated over his backstabbing scheme, ready to reap the rewards. By now it should be finished. All that's left is to sit back and wait for the good news. His twisted, chilling laughter made the purple-haired judge suspicious. Meanwhile, back in the dark forest, the ground began to tremble violently. The Hell's Beast roared, frantically charging like a storm of fire. Van immediately entered a defensive stance and shouted, "It's here!" The tension was thick enough to snap, but Van handled it perfectly. "I'll hold it back while I create an opening. Use your strongest attacks." Hearing orders from a Gonda tribesman, the brown-haired student snapped, "You bastard, who do you think you are ordering us around?" But the beast was already right in front of them with terrifying speed. Van's red eyes narrowed in shock. After a split second of hesitation, he bolted like lightning, leaving his two stunned teammates behind. Closing the distance to the giant monster, cold, killing intent flared in Van's eyes. He poured all his power into his fist, unleashing the technique strike cruising. Blow, he punched straight at the head of the charging beast. It was a strike technique, predicting the enemy's movement and hitting their primary force point. For four-legged beasts, the head is always the first part to move. Van poured everything into that cruising blow, aiming to strike that critical point. He hit it square on to the shock of his teammates. But Van's direct punch didn't have the expected effect. The monster's hide was too thick. The attack couldn't penetrate the beast's body. Having been reborn as a scrawny 15-year-old body, Van's punch lacked the sheer strength needed to bring down the Hell's Beast. This Hell's Beast, realizing the attack failed, Van immediately jumped back and shouted to signal his teammates. Now! Hearing the signal, ManhwaCapped immediately activated his wind magic. The windstorm tore through the sky. A powerful vortex of wind erupted, restraining the beast. Right after, Eisenbach roared heroically and leaped into the air. He swung his sword down hard at the monster's head, but the impact was repelled, leaving him stunned. It's too hard. The failed attack only made the beast more enraged. Its eyes glowed red with killing intent. Sensing the danger, Van screamed, "Get down now!" The Hell's Beast roared frantically, delivering a charge with terrifying force, smashing everything around them. Rocks and dirt flew everywhere. Van struggled to his feet, gritting his teeth as he looked at the beast, which was still radiating murderous intent. Eisenbach lay on the ground after the violent impact, groaning in pain. "Damn it, it hurts!" Van sighed, walked over to them, and spoke calmly. "Are you two still alive?" ManhwaCapped struggled to get up, cold sweat streaming down his face. He said helplessly, "I used the wind to deflect it slightly, but there won't be a next time." Eisenbach looked at his sword in total despair. "Is this the end? My sword is completely useless." Yet standing before his discouraged teammates, Van remained unwavering. He looked straight ahead and declared decisively, "All right, one more time." ManhwaCapped looked up, stunned. "Huh." Van's red eyes narrowed with determination. "Next time we'll finish it." He watched the flaming Hell's boss beast, roaring in the distance, preparing for its next charge. ManhwaCapped snapped, "Are you not watching? We can't pierce its magic barrier." Van stated it as calmly as a teacher in a classroom. "Next time, try mixing dirt and rocks into your wind. It won't be an invisible blade anymore, but it will have much more destructive power." Van turned to Eisenbach, leaning down to guide him kindly. "And you, if you want to deal real damage, stop slashing and start stabbing. Flatten your blade, aim for the gaps between the ribs, and focus all your mana into one single point." Seeing Van's terrifying calm, ManhwaCapped couldn't help but ask, "What the hell are you thinking? You know full well that after all that, we have no chance of winning, but your injuries are the lightest. If you use me as a decoy, you can escape." ManhwaCapped looked Van straight in the eye, full of remorse. "I mean it. Don't hold back. After all, I tried to kill you before." Hearing the decoy proposal, Van just turned his back and walked away, answering casually, "I'm not interested in petty revenge, even though I once tried to kill you when I listened to the enemy's offer to use you as bait." Van just coldly turned away, walking off as he calmly replied, "I have no interest in petty revenge, Van." Looking up at the sky through the leaves, I declared firmly that my goal was for my family, for the Gonda tribe, to finally be recognized as part of this kingdom. I stepped forward resolutely, leaving behind words that left the two mages completely shaken. "That's why I can't just run away and abandon my comrades in this country." Van's righteous words left ManhwaCapped completely stunned. Dark memories immediately flooded his mind. He recalled how he had once scorned, insulted, and even tried to kill Van just for being from the Gonda tribe. This slap to his character left him blushing with shame, wishing the ground would swallow him whole. Just then, the massive Hellsport beast, enveloped in raging red flames, roared crazily and charged forward with terrifying speed, looming right in front of Van's fiery red eyes, with cold killing intent flashing. Van shouted his command to attack. His brown-haired teammate gathered all his magical power, activating a blue magic circle under his feet. Roaring heroically, Blade Dance activate. Wind magic, Black Dust erosion. It exploded violently. Just as Van had planned, the blade of black wind, now infused with sand and rock, slammed directly into the demonic beast. The strike was precise, not only causing damage, but also completely blinding the monster. Seeing this, Van smirked triumphantly. "Nice, that blinded it." Not missing the golden opportunity, Van shouted, "My turn!" Swift as a flash, he leaped, jumping straight onto the beast's back, his mind quickly analyzing its structure. The biology of the opponent. The shoulder blades of a quadruped are different from humans. They aren't directly connected to the spine, giving the front legs incredibly flexible range of motion, but that reduces stability against sudden forces. Van channeled strength into both hands, immediately deploying high-level soft technique spiral flow. The resonant power from Van's rotation caused the giant monster to lose its balance completely, crashing and flipping over onto the ground pathetically. Seeing that, Van immediately screamed, "Stab its heart now!" Eisenbach poured his last bit of strength into lifting his glowing gold sword, roaring heroically to deliver the thrust, aiming for the monster's weak point. But at the very moment, the sword tip was about to hit the target. The demonic beast suddenly widened its eyes, staring straight at him. It caught Eisenbach off guard. No refusing to give up. Eisenbach gritted his teeth and roared like a madman, putting his full power into stabbing the blade down. Witnessing that scene, Wancha X behind them cheered joyfully. "We did it!" But Van quickly sensed something was wrong. He panicked, realizing, "It's not over yet, no." Just as Van feared, even though the sword tip touched the monster's heart, it couldn't pierce through it at all. The demon beast's heart suddenly contracted violently. Immediately after, the monster threw its head back and let out a heaven-shaking roar, activating its skill, Destructive Roar. This is a special ability found only in certain mutated demonic beasts. The roar, channeled with immense magic, created a terrifying shockwave. The destructive force sent Eisenbach flying, his sword falling to the ground. Eisenbach's eyes. He collapsed on the ground, blood dripping incessantly from the corner of his mouth. His body was completely paralyzed, trembling in extreme fear, unable to move. "Are my internal organs damaged?" The situation was tense as a violin string. The flaming demonic beast opened its maw, slowly approaching Eisenbach's helpless body, its fiery red eyes emitting a killing intent, eager to devour its prey, facing imminent death. Eisenbach was in a total panic, sweating profusely and shaking. "It's over. I'm dead for sure." But in that split second of danger, Van had lunged out in time to block the path, using his bare hands to stop the beast's giant fang. He immediately deployed Spiral Flow. This technique doesn't meet force head-on. Instead, it disperses the force in a spiral pattern and redirects it directly into the ground beneath his feet. However, the beast roared in fury, pouring even more massive magical force downward. Blocking like this is really exhausting. Van struggled, sweat pouring down his face as he realized he couldn't redirect all the force. In this life-or-death situation, Van gritted his teeth, thinking about using his forbidden power. He whispered to himself, "I don't know how much longer this 15-year-old body can handle it. But it's better than dying here." Seeing Eisenbach still staring blankly at him, Van turned his head and shouted, "Eisenbach, run away!" Hearing Van's scream, Eisenbach could only moan in pain, struggling to crawl backward. Immediately after, the pressure from the beast became even more terrifying. Even though Van tried his best, his current body had reached its limit. The demon beast let out a horrific roar. It put its strength into a powerful headbutt, sending Van flying far away before he slammed into the ground. The brutal impact made Van cough up blood in pain. Seeing Van severely injured, his teammate rushed over in a panic, screaming, "Van!" But Van immediately yelled to stop him. "Don't come here!" The giant monster now rushed forward like a madman, crushing the surrounding earth and rock, creating a charge with destructive power that plowed through a large patch of the forest. Facing the monster's overwhelming power, Van clicked his tongue in helplessness. But in the nick of time, Van decided he couldn't hide his power any longer. He closed his eyes, whispering in his mind, "Sink deep. My heart, let these shackles break." Immediately, a terrifying red and black aura erupted, engulfing Van's body. This sudden change caused the giant beast to pause in shock, but just then, the beast was suddenly blown away. A figure with shimmering golden hair and a noble aura slowly stepped forward from behind. The appearance of the boss made the two teammates' eyes go wide. "Prince Henry, this place is too dangerous. Please leave at once." Yet Hansel just wore a fake benevolent smile and replied calmly, "I cannot do that. Protecting those struggling to survive as subjects of this kingdom is the duty of the royal family." Hansel's righteous words left his two teammates incredibly touched, cheering, "Your Highness." Yet that fake compassionate smile only made Van feel more disgusted. Deep down he seethed, "Yeah, right. That's always how you use flowery words to win people over, only to lead them to their deaths." Memories of that cruel betrayal in his past life tore at his heart once more. Just then Henry raised his hand and called out sonorously, "Everyone, let's join forces now to fight this formidable enemy." But before he could finish his act as the righteous lead, Van hit him with a cold splash of reality. "I refuse." Van's definitive tone left everyone stunned. Henry asked, bewildered, "What?" Van stood tall and repeated, "I said I refuse. Your power isn't needed here." His bluntness made Henry's face change completely. His teammates, seeing this, jumped up to defend their idol. That's the prince. Show some respect when you're speaking. Exactly. If His Highness hadn't stepped in to help earlier then... Van calmly raised both hands and coldly interrupted. Right, we would have already defeated it, if you hadn't interfered and gotten in the way. Van's counterintuitive words left the two teammates frozen cold sweat dripping in shock as Henry narrowed his eyes at Van. He feigned a question. Are you saying you really don't need my help? Just then the Hellsport beast roared madly and charged again. Van stepped forward and replied coolly, that's right. He turned his back on Henry and coldly dropped one final line, just shut up and stand there and watch. Like how the nobility should, the Hellsport beast roared wildly. Van immediately shouted a warning to his team, it's coming. Behind him, the two male students were in a defensive stance, cold sweat streaming down. Even though he was terrified, the brown-haired student steeled himself. All right. This time I'm bound to land at least one hit. But Van quickly stopped him. Don't rush in yet. You'll just be wasting your lives. The other teammate struggled to speak up. I only have one hit left in me too. Van's eyes hardened with determination. That's enough. Both of you wait for my signal. Seeing Van's confidence, they both nodded in agreement. A single second of hesitation passed, then Van shouted loudly, let's go! This time we're finishing it. The two teammates immediately responded. Got it. Van darted off like a shot heading straight for the boss, silently thinking to himself, last time I panicked way too much. This time I'll take it down without needing to use that technique. The Hellsport beast immediately unleashed a powerful lift impact bash, but Van nimbly leaped into the air, dodging the attack by a hair's breadth. It unexpectedly followed up with a vicious hook. Van quickly twisted his body to dodge the sharp fangs, whispering smugly, good. The opening is a bit smaller, but that's more than enough for me to handle. His incredible movement speed left the two students behind him completely stunned, only able to stammer in shock. What was that speed? He didn't even use magic. Watching from afar, Prince Henry couldn't help but feel shaken. That's not just simple speed. By moving through a center of gravity manipulation technique without needing to stomp for momentum on the ground, he's completely eliminated all unnecessary preparatory movements. This is a technique I've only seen in performances by high-level magic warriors. Who on earth is he? Van continued to dodge. He leaped into the air, narrowly avoiding the beast's direct bash in spectacular fashion. Witnessing such peak physical combat, the two students shouted, both impressed and worried. Amazing, but attacks without magic are nothing more than gentle pats to a Hellsport beast. Seeing the beast seemingly unfazed by Van's physical strikes, everyone else felt anxious, but Van, in total contrast, curled his lip into a confident smirk. This is perfect. It turned out he had already set a sophisticated trap. The goal was just to provoke it. Provoked repeatedly, the beast completely lost its mind. It opened its fang-filled maw and let out a wild, furious roar. Van's red eyes narrowed. He realized the golden opportunity had arrived. It was the wind-up for the destructive roar. Just as predicted, the beast tipped its head back to charge its energy. A split second later, Van shouted his command, right now, receiving the signal. The wind element student immediately poured all his mana into activating a glowing green magic circle and roared. A gale of razor-sharp wind lashed out toward the monster. The wind blades mixed with dust and dirt tore into the beast's respiratory system, causing it to cough up blood in pain. The destructive roar was completely interrupted. Witnessing the perfect combo, Van dove down from above and praised them. Good job. Taking advantage of the moment the beast was stunned, Van closed in from behind, pouring his ultimate physical strength into both fists. A burning crimson aura flared up as he activated the secret technique, Cruising Blow Double Twin. Van's powerful double punch created intense shockwaves that traveled from both the left and right, converging precisely at a single point inside the beast's skull. These shockwaves intersected like ripples on water, resonating to create a larger wave of destruction from within in just an instant. The beast's solid magic defensive layer vanished completely. Seeing the golden opportunity to end the fight, Van immediately shouted, urging him on, "You're the last one!" Not missing the chance. Ralph poured all his strength into a heroic roar, swinging his glowing sword to land a fatal blow. The giant beast collapsed to the ground, completely motionless. Staring at the massive entity lying still before his eyes, Ralph sat on the ground, gasping for air, still in shock. "We actually beat it! I can't believe it!" We actually took down a hell sport beast. While the rest of the group was still lost in their amazement, Van quietly walked over. Van approached and reached out to help Ralph up, asking kindly, "Well done. Can you move?" Ralph grabbed Van's hand and struggled to stand, letting out a relieved sigh. "Yeah, I'm okay. I really thought my internal organs had been seriously damaged." Van calmly explained, "That was actually just a wave-based technique. He's just using magical sound waves to disrupt your inner ear canal. It looks flashy, but you can easily counter it just by covering your ears." Ralph smiled helplessly at that. "I'll keep that in mind. Although I hope to never fight a monster like that again," Van muttered casually, turning away to brush off the dust, looking effortlessly cool until he looked down and noticed something strange. There were only 2 Heaven's Tears flowers left in the patch, glowing in isolation. The examiner's warning immediately echoed in his head, about how forming too large a group would only bring endless trouble. Now Van truly understood the meaning behind those words. With time running out, the shortage of flowers made the atmosphere between them incredibly tense. The risk of failing the exam made his 2 teammates panic. What are we supposed to do now? There was no time left. So Fa looked at Ralph with a hesitant expression before firmly picking the last 2 flowers, thinking to himself that 1 flower obviously had to go to His Highness Henry, and then respectfully offered it to the blonde prince, who smiled gently and said, "Thank you," an action that instantly infuriated Van. He shouted angrily, "Sucking up to him, are you? Why give it to someone who just stood there watching?" Fa wasn't one to back down, his face reddening as he argued back, "Don't call it sucking up. This is a subject's natural duty." But right after that, Fa suddenly turned toward him and held out the remaining flower toward Van, "And the other one is yours." Surprised by this action, Van asked, "Are you sure?" Fa turned his head away shyly, explaining, "Don't get the wrong idea, I just don't want to owe you anything." He cleared his throat and continued, "And my name isn't the Wind User, I'm Fa." Ralph beamed and introduced himself as well, "And I'm Ralph, don't forget it," faced with the lively introductions from his 2 teammates. Van's gaze wavered slightly before he calmly offered his own name, Van, and reached out to shake their hands. "Nice to meet you guys." However, he didn't forget to deliver a cold remark. "If you 2 fail this exam, we won't even have a chance to meet again." The comment made Fa yell in frustration, "Shut up." Ralph, still optimistic, added, "If we look right now, we can still make it." Just then Henry suddenly spoke up, cutting them off. "You don't need to worry about that." The blonde prince knelt down and used his signature light magic. Under the brilliant glow, the Heaven's Tears flowers hidden in the bushes began to shine and reveal themselves. This game-breaking move left his 2 teammates stunned and speechless, and even Van couldn't help but be secretly startled. Henry handed the glowing flowers he had just found to Ralph and Faye. The flowers bloomed brilliantly under the sunlight. "Please take these." Ralph and Faye were deeply moved, bowing their heads to receive them. "Thank you, Your Highness." Standing from behind, Van just silently observed, his eyes filled with vigilance as he watched Henry's smile while the sunset drew near, painting the sky red. Van urged, "Let's get out of this forest quickly." However, his commanding attitude immediately annoyed Fa, who shouted, "Hey, don't go giving orders and ignoring His Highness." Ralph quickly stepped in to mediate. Come on." As the group walked out, Henry suddenly spoke up. "By the way, Van, you used earth magic to erase your footprints earlier, didn't you?" Van turned his head back, suspicious. "So what?" Henry walked calmly behind him and explained, "I've heard of that before. That's about the footwork for concealing tracks technique. What they call the assassin's ritual." The prince's cool call-out made the surrounding atmosphere instantly drop into a tense silence. Henry looked straight at Van, his blue eyes probing. "The martial arts you displayed earlier, along with that deeply ingrained habit. Van, could it be that you are an assassin?" Faced with the blonde prince's suspicion, Van remained silent, his red eyes staring straight back without answering a word. Henry sighed slightly, and then began to explain his own complicated situation. He had many enemies within the royal family. To consolidate power, the king had taken princesses from conquered lands as consorts. But Henry's mother, the 5th consort, had been a legitimate noblewoman from the Forain's kingdom from the start. The drama of this family made his half-siblings furious, terrified of losing their shot at the throne, facing assassination plots that could strike at any moment. Henry was forced to act alone during this exam to protect himself. Staring intently at Van, the murderous intent in Henry's eyes flickered as he calculated if this guy was truly a lackey sent by them, he would have to deal with him right here and now. Van was also silently blaming himself for letting his guard down. His old habits had accidentally slipped out again. Defeating that demonic beast had made him lose his edge. Even though he was indeed a former assassin in his past life, he couldn't admit it now. Van decided to play dumb to fool him. He scratched his head, feigning ignorance, and asked back, "Huh, is that some kind of assassin ritual? I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about," seeing Van's innocent expression. Henry narrowed his eyes in suspicion. "Are you playing dumb?" The stubbornness of the other party made the atmosphere stretch tight like a bowstring, seeing that the other side wouldn't let it go. Van clicked his tongue, his gaze suddenly sharpening with defiance. "If that's what you want to think, suit yourself." The two stared at each other, probing. The atmosphere in the forest suddenly became more tense and suffocating than ever as strong winds unexpectedly began to blow, swept up by the rustling dry leaves swirling around them. This heated clash left Ralph and Fa standing behind, trembling with anxiety as they tracked every movement. Realizing the situation was spiraling, Faye rushed forward intending to intervene, but Van stepped in just in time. Hanzo's blue eyes narrowed, radiating a dangerously sharp aura directed straight at Van, yet just as the conflict seemed about to explode, Van suddenly reached out and patted Henry lightly on the shoulder. He gave a faint, sheepish smile and nonchalantly said, "Just kidding, you know. Don't look at me with such a scary face." Van's overly intimate gesture left Ralph and Faye standing behind, completely bewildered with a series of question marks hovering over their heads. Van folded his hands in front of his chest. He laughed it off, admitting his fault to break the awkwardness. "I know my etiquette is lacking. After all, I'm just a guy from the countryside. Please cut me some slack." Watching Van's flippant attitude, Henry fell into deep thought, sensing he had purposely left an opening, yet Van hadn't taken the bait. At the same time, cold sweat broke out on Van's face. He silently reminded himself to stay calm. "He's testing me. If I let my emotions get the better of me here, my path to becoming a knight will be completely shattered." However, Hanzo wasn't ready to let it go that easily. He looked straight at Van and asked sternly, "I don't mind how you speak, but can you answer my question one more time? What was that move you used to erase your footprints earlier? Are you truly not an assassin?" Facing the prince's tricky question, Van kept his expression bright, casually offering a pre-prepared lie. "That was because the noble recommended me. Helen Steins taught me that. She said that since my only weapon is close-quarters unarmed combat, it's best to hide my techniques as much as possible." Van's answer immediately had an unexpected effect. Henry was completely shaken, his blue eyes widening in astonishment as he blurted out, "You have a recommendation letter from the Steinsgate family." This shocking news made his teammate Ralph's eyes light up like he'd struck gold, unable to hide his admiration as he exclaimed, "That's amazing! The Steinsgate Duke family isn't just some ordinary noble family. You know, I just thought she looked pretty arrogant and powerful, but..." Ralph immediately corrected himself. "It's not just powerful, she's on a completely different level." Standing behind, Henry looked at Van pensively. He knew Helen Steins very well, the one dubbed the Ice Flower Lady of the Academy, as she was always in the top 5 of the school, both in academics and ability for someone so outstanding. Understanding assassination skills was understandable. The credibility of that name immediately extinguished all suspicion. Because the Steins family was an ancient, grand, noble house serving the kingdom, they had absolutely no reason to participate in a dangerous conspiracy like assassinating the prince. Ralph curiously asked, "Hey, why did the Steins family recommend you anyway?" Van replied nonchalantly. It was like she said, 'I'll give you a recommendation letter, so go take the exam,' and that was that." His matter-of-fact answer made Fa break out in a cold sweat. Something like that can actually happen. Fa's stunned reaction to Van's breezy explanation left the whole group speechless. Henry then stepped forward and gently explained, "They probably wanted to give you a formal education so that later on, you could serve their family. Looking at your excellent close-quarters skills, that makes perfect sense. If I had met you earlier, I probably would have done the same." Van glanced back with fiery red eyes and replied coldly, "Yeah, thanks." However, that sweet attempt at reassurance couldn't wash away the suspicion swirling in Henry's mind. He thought to himself, if there really was a plot targeting him during this exam, then it's highly likely the culprit is that giant Hellsport magical beast. Henry shuddered. "I don't know what would have happened if I had encountered it alone. You all really are my lifesavers." With that, the polite prince bowed his head. "I sincerely thank you all." Hanzo's action made Ralph and Faye incredibly flustered, their faces turning bright red with joy. "It's nothing at all. It's our honor." However, Van immediately poured a bucket of cold water on them. I didn't fight for your sake, you know. Ralph and Fa immediately flew into a rage, pointing at Van's face and yelling, You're about to be arrested for disrespecting royalty. Despite his two panicked teammates, Henry just silently observed Van. He mentally assessed that instead of seeking rewards or currying favor with royalty, the guy was acting defiant. Truly a mysterious fellow. Under the sunset which dyed the corner of the sky red, the group stepped out of the dark forest's exit. Outside the forest, the atmosphere was incredibly lively. The heat was palpable as candidates returned one by one. Some happily shared, "Oh, you passed too. Well, that was to be expected." But there were also candidates who failed, sitting helplessly on the ground. "Oh, what am I going to tell my father now?" At this moment, the bearded proctor was standing there impatiently. He turned to ask his subordinate who was busy recording names. "How many more are there?" The subordinate respectfully replied, "Including the prince, there are 4 more, sir." The proctor's palms began to sweat coldly. He worriedly muttered to himself, "Strange what is going on. Initially, this forest only had magical beasts that the prince could easily defeat. I wanted to avoid the situation where royalty would fail my exam. Furthermore, that demon beast still hasn't been seen returning. Could something unexpected have happened?" The fear of being expelled from the academy made the proctor's face go deathly pale. Just then a student suddenly shouted, "Oh, someone is coming out!" The bearded proctor turned around beaming with excitement and yelled, "Oh, is that His Highness?" But from the swirling dust of the forest, the first figure to emerge was Van. He looked calmly at the crowd and asked, confused, "What's going on? Did you all gather here to welcome me?" Seeing Van emerge completely unscathed, the bearded proctor's jaw dropped, his eyes bulging in total shock. "What the?" Van came out of the forest safe and sound. The professor was equally stunned, his eyes widening in horror at the sight of an unharmed Van. Seeing him return, the purple-haired student rushed over, asking anxiously, "You made it back safely. Are you hurt anywhere?" Van replied nonchalantly, "Oh, it's nothing serious." Standing behind them, the professor trembled, pointing a finger at Van while screaming in a panic inside his own head, "Wait! Why are you still alive?" Sensing the professor's strange expression, the purple-haired student looked curious. Van slowly stepped forward, staring straight at the man with a cryptic gaze. Then he calmly asked, "Is me being alive such a bad thing?" Caught off guard, the professor panicked and quickly waved his hands to cover his slip-up. No, I'm just very impressed that you managed to survive and return alone." Van smiled slightly and replied, "Not alone. Look." Right after that, Fa's loud voice rang out from behind. "Hey, Van, don't just go off on your own like that." Raph and Faye struggled to drag the giant carcass of the fanged beast, tied up with ropes, constantly complaining, "This thing is insanely heavy." Seeing the carcass, the professor's jaw hit the floor and he screamed in terror, "What?" He started trembling on the verge of fainting. "That head, don't tell me that's actually a fanged beast." Raph immediately explained, "It suddenly attacked us in the forest, because we were worried it might have targeted His Highness too. We brought it back as proof." The parade of the monster's head through the arena corridor left everyone frozen in disbelief for several seconds. "No way!" The professor's mind was in total chaos. He was frantic, thinking, come to think of it, how could the fanged beast have failed to finish them off? Why would a monster like that even be in the forest? The professor stood dazed, muttering. The purple-haired student turned to him and asked, "Professor, what did you just say?" The professor jumped, pulling back his panicked expression, and clutched his chest to recover. "Oh, nothing. It's just truly impressive that you managed to defeat a fanged beast." Just then Henry walked out, radiantly, arms spread wide, excitedly shouting, "That was truly a magnificent battle." Seeing his appearance, the professor's face shifted instantly. He shouted in a panic, "Oh, Your Highness!" The purple-haired proctor turned curiously and asked, "Did His Highness also fight the fanged beast?" Henry smiled and replied, "I just happened to be nearby." Hearing this, cold sweat poured down the professor's face. He turned pale as a ghost, frantic, unable to eat or sleep, thinking, "This is really bad. I released a fanged beast to go after royalty. If this gets exposed, I'm done for." With the professor's face drained of all color, Henry asked kindly, "Professor, are you okay? You look terrible." The professor jumped in surprise. He quickly waved his hands, forcing a smile to cover his tracks. "No, it's just as expected from Your Highness. To be able to defeat even that fanged beast." The professor suddenly raised both hands to the sky, laughing loudly and artificially. "Ha ha ha! Long live the kingdom!" This masterful display of acting left Van standing nearby, completely speechless. What is wrong with this guy? He looks incredibly suspicious. Just then Henry stepped up to explain to everyone, as I said before, I just happened to be there. Defeating the fanged beast was entirely their achievement. He turned his gaze toward Van and emphasized, especially Van. If it weren't for him, all of us probably would have lost our lives. The professor was sweating profusely, trembling, unable to believe his ears. That Gonda guy? Really? The shock didn't stop there as Raph slung his arm around Van, excitedly praising him to Fa. This kid is truly amazing even though he's from the Gonda clan. He has an incredibly deep knowledge of magic. Fa also bowed his head slightly, frankly admitting, His Highness is right. We fought under Van's command. Witnessing this unbelievable scene, the professor completely fell apart. He stuttered to himself, no way. How could a Gonda? Just then Henry smiled slightly to smooth things over. Since he is under the patronage of the Steins family, this isn't all that surprising, is it? Right, Van? Van broke into a cold sweat. An image of Helen appeared in his mind, and he thought to himself, actually, Helen didn't teach me anything. But fine, I'll just go along with it. Seeing both the prince and the ice flower lady, Helen vouching for Van, the surrounding crowd started whispering in amazement. Even His Highness thinks highly of him. And he even has a recommendation letter from the ice flower lady, so there are actually talented people in the Gonda clan too. The purple-haired proctor slowly approached. Van bowed slightly and said, Thank you. He sincerely expressed his gratitude for protecting the prince. As a citizen of the kingdom, I am truly grateful to you. Van replied, I wasn't protecting anyone. It attacked us, so we just defended ourselves, to avoid the awkward atmosphere. To quickly change the subject, he pulled out the blue flower and held it up in front of everyone. Regardless, this is the Tear of Heaven flower that Ralph, Fania, and Henry had all collected. They were brought up to confirm that all the members had obtained the necessary items. Naturally, they had passed the requirements. The professor, standing nearby, swallowed hard, cold sweat streaming down his face, his heart filled with resentment and fear as his cruel scheme had completely failed, trembling. He began to read the list of students who passed the exam. Prince Henry Fania and Ralph Eisenberg all passed. He was so furious he nearly had a stroke on the spot. He struggled to choke out the final name, swallowing his tears of rage. Stumbling over his words and standing right there in front of the professor was Van Kruger. The professor helplessly called out his name, gritting his teeth as he announced, I acknowledge that these 4 have passed. As soon as the announcement ended, Ralph and Fania cheered excitedly. We did it! Fania also smiled, feeling proud. Well, that was to be expected. Standing amidst the joyful atmosphere, Van looked up at the bright sky thinking, so this is it. Having overcome so many trials and cowardly schemes, he had officially become a student at the Magic Academy. However, the abnormal appearance of the demonic beast remained a huge question mark. The school would conduct a thorough investigation and report back to the royal family. This announcement was like a death sentence hanging over the professor, who was shaking in his boots. The next day, in the magnificent main hall of the academy, the solemn opening ceremony officially took place. All the new students gathered seriously below the stage. After a long, exhausting night of incidents, this formal ceremony made quite a few students want to doze off right where they stood. On the high platform, the respected headmaster with his white hair and beard spoke clearly, I am very pleased to welcome all of you here today. What our academy demands of you is not merely magic talent, but above all, noble character. To become the sword and shield that protects this kingdom. Standing among the students. Van bowed his head slightly, looking at his new uniform. A complex mix of emotions welled up inside him. In his previous life, he had never dared to imagine this scene. Someone like him from the Gonda tribe, being able to stand on equal footing with the nobility and attend such a formal ceremony. He smiled slightly, his red eyes reflecting hope. Even though it was a small step, this world was definitely beginning to change. He would continue on this path with all his might, until the day discrimination against the Gonda tribe was completely erased. From the windy balcony of the hall, Helen Stein stood quietly observing the ceremony. Her gaze rested on Van's silhouette down below. After the ceremony ended, Helen strode through the long, gold-lit corridors of the academy. She stopped in front of a giant, intricately carved wooden door. Pushing it open, she entered to reveal a luxurious meeting room where the powerful members of the academy's round table had already gathered around a red table. Everyone seems to be here, I suppose. Karina Luthier, known as the Sword Princess of 1,000 Miles, rested her chin on her hand, looking visibly annoyed. What is this? Showing up last and acting so high and mighty. This sharp jab filled the room with tension. Amelia Rodenwood, the group's mediator, spoke up to cut through the noise and refocus on the main issue. More importantly, why have we gathered here today? Anuf Clovius, the Silent Beauty, crossed her arms and replied calmly, there is only one topic for the 5 stars to discuss, right? The 8th Prince. Honest Fanya smirked deviously from his luxurious armchair. It's about dealing with the anomaly. Helen Stein glanced over, murmuring meaningfully, the anomaly, huh? Anuf continued to stir the pot. Speaking of which, a rather unusual event occurred during the entrance exam, didn't it? Amelia nodded in agreement. True. Anuf explained with a stern voice. For the first time since the Academy's founding, we have admitted a student from the Gonda tribe. Hearing this, Karina Luthier sneered with disdain. The school has become far too lenient lately. At this rate, maybe they'll start admitting monsters next. Someone without magic, a barbarian, being treated as our equal. This is truly a grave situation. This outburst of discrimination made the air tense. It was suffocating. The eyes of the 8th Prince. Honest Fanya suddenly turned cold and sharp. And furthermore, the person who recommended that Gonda turns out to be a member of our very own 5 stars. This revelation, aimed directly at a teammate, shocked the entire room. He clasped his hands together in front of his chin. He exuded a heavy pressure that filled the room. An explanation was mandatory. Honest looked straight ahead and called out the person behind that bold decision, Helen Stein, facing the intense questioning from the round table. Helen remained standing tall, her face calm without a flicker of hesitation. The Magic Academy has always been a gathering place for the children, of nobles proud of their superior magical abilities. The petty disputes between them often turn into heated duels. To maintain order in a place like this, a group of elite students established a disciplinary organization called the 5 Stars, the 5 people at the top of the entire academy. Just now, the 8th Prince, Honest Fanya, sitting in his luxurious armchair, raised his voice to challenge Helen Stein. Now explain yourself. What the hell was the Stein house thinking when they issued a recommendation letter for a Gonda facing the prince's pressure? Helen replied calmly, I simply recognized that he had strength. That is all. Her explanation was immediately met with fierce opposition. Karina Luthier laughed with contempt. Strength in a Gonda. Have you lost your mind? They are nothing but wretches cursed by the gods. How could they ever possess any real power? Amelia Rodenwood agrees, and I think so too. The Academy is meant to forge the sword and shield of the kingdom. How could someone without magic possibly protect the people? Prince Honest Farania nods with a smug grin. Exactly. To those without magic, the gods simply do not exist. That is common sense in this country. Hearing those biased remarks, Helen offers a faint, sarcastic smile. Common sense, you say? How convenient. That's just a canned excuse people use to stop thinking and justify their own pathetic prejudices. The atmosphere in this meeting room grows incredibly tense from their bickering, just as Achnuf Clovius speaks up with a suggestion in that case. Why not put him to the test? See if this Van Kruger kid is actually tough or just all talk. Prince Honest Farania laughs, clearly intrigued. I see, that's a good idea. Helen, do you agree? If he's just a loser, your position as his backer is going to get pretty shaky. Helen accepts calmly. I agree. Send whoever you want to face him. I don't care. But if you don't want to humiliate yourselves, I'd suggest you don't underestimate him. Honest smirks deviously. Oh, is that so? Karina Luthier immediately stands up with an excited grin. Then I'll be the one to do it, Your Highness. No. Honest Farania coldly delivers his final verdict. Go ahead. Give it everything you've got. After receiving orders from the 8th Prince, Honest Karina turns and walks away, watching her back. Helen asks with a hidden meaning. Karina, don't tell me he's already caught your attention. Karina scoffs coldly and replies, I just want to crush him. The one you favor so much. I'll crush your pride right along with him. Facing that challenge, Helen just stares back with a sharp gaze. Time passes. In the academy corridors, students are bustling about, buzzing with talk about the horse riding class, the upcoming ranking announcements, or the challenging theoretical magic exercises walking through the crowd. Van mutters to himself. It's been a week since I started at the academy. Life has been so peaceful that it's almost suspicious, despite the occasional annoying comments from those who discriminate against the Gonda clan. But everything is still under his control. Yet that peace is quickly tested during a theoretical magic class in a massive lecture hall. An elderly professor with curly white hair stands at the podium, adjusting his glasses and fixing a scrutinizing gaze on Van, calling out clearly, "Now, Van, can you explain the four elements theory in magic?" The tricky question hangs in the air, leaving Van silent. Seeing his silence, the surrounding students start whispering and laughing, thinking the question is way beyond the basics and that a Gonda clansman could never answer it. The professor smirks sarcastically, closing his book and mocking, "Asking that of you seems a bit too much, doesn't it? After all, expecting knowledge from someone who only knows how to use brute force is just setting myself up for disappointment." Yet despite the class's contempt, Van calmly stands up, places his hands on the desk, and answers clearly. The four elements theory is the principle for stabilizing four fundamental factors: flow density, resonance, and fixation. Van's textbook perfect theoretical explanation leaves the professor frozen solid. Before he can recover, Van calmly continues. It is used to prevent stagnation and the backflow of magic power. At the same time, it serves as the foundational design for modern magical formulas. Van asks with a friendly smile, "Professor, would you like me to explain in further detail?" The subtle retort leaves the professor sweating profusely, forced to helplessly say that is enough. Ever since that impressive display, the blatant harassment aimed at Van has completely stopped. As he walks down the hall, Ralph suddenly rushes up from behind and pats Van on the shoulder. Van turns and says, "Oh, Ralph." Ralph grumbles, "Why the serious face? Let's go eat," looking at his close friend. Van smiles and thinks to himself, "This piece is probably partly thanks to Ralph and Faye standing up to protect me earlier." He says gently, "I mean, you've really helped me out a lot. All right, let's head to the cafeteria." But as the two walk along the hall together, an arrogant voice suddenly rings out from behind, "Stop right there, you first year." The two turn around and see a purple-haired female student. With a haughty expression, she stands in their way. Van frowns slightly and asks, "What is it?" The purple-haired student tilts her chin, demanding unreasonably, "You just walked right past me." Van didn't want any trouble, so he casually replied, "Oh, I didn't notice my mistake." Ralph, standing beside him, quickly bowed his head to apologize on his friend's behalf, saying, "I'm sorry," but just as Van was about to step forward, a sharp blade flashed out of its scabbard and was pointed straight at Van's throat in the blink of an eye. Witnessing this sudden act of violence, Ralph panicked and shouted, "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" The purple-haired student curled her lip into a contemptuous smirk and coldly declared, "Commoners should know how to kneel before nobles. And as for your kind, Aganda, you'd better just hit the floor and beg for forgiveness to play your part properly." Facing the sharp blade pressed against his neck, Van didn't flinch. He calmly retorted, "There's no reason for me to go that far. This is an academy, and we're all students here." His firm response only made her angrier. The purple-haired student's eyes narrowed with murderous intent. She pressed the tip of the blade even closer and growled, "Do you even realize the situation you're in?" Seeing the girl's aggressive behavior, Ralph immediately intervened. "I don't care if you're a senior, this is crossing the line," but the purple-haired student kept her sword coldly pointed at Van and replied, "I have no intention of shedding blood for no reason. Stop being stubborn. Just play the role of an extra. Behave and I'll grant you a peaceful life." Ralph nervously called out to Van. Facing the sword pointed straight at him, Van remained incredibly composed and coldly replied, "Basic respect between seniors and juniors is fine, but when someone tries to use force to coerce me, I just want to do the exact opposite." As soon as he finished speaking, Van moved with lightning speed, reaching out and clamping two fingers tightly onto her blade. That reckless move made the purple-haired student startle and get angry. "You brat." She immediately tried to pull her sword back, afraid he would disarm her, but Van was one step faster. He put his strength into twisting the blade and shoved it back toward her. The sudden reversal threw the purple-haired student off balance. By pure instinct, she tightened her grip on the hilt to steady herself, accidentally throwing her entire body weight onto the fragile blade. Waiting for just that moment, Van channeled force into his hand and delivered a lightning-fast snap. The blade shattered into pieces. It was the blade break technique. By combining bending and twisting forces, Van pushed the metal to its breaking point and shattered the blade's structure with a single sharp impact. This display of public vandalism left the purple-haired student frozen for 5 seconds. Van casually brushed off his hands and dropped a sarcastic comment, "How fragile. Did you add zinc to your sword? Handing me such a flimsy blade is basically asking me to break it." In reality, zinc alloy swords are cheap and rust-resistant, so they are often used for training, but their hardness is very low, and they can't handle real combat at all. The purple-haired student bowed her head slightly, gritting her teeth to save face. Real swords aren't allowed on school grounds. Besides, I'm not one of the 5-star sovereigns. Hearing this, Van repeated full of suspicion, 5-star sovereigns. The purple-haired student quickly turned and walked away, murmuring to herself, "Well, at least I finished my mission." Just then, an arrogant voice suddenly rang out from behind. "So it seems you've got some claws after all." A girl with vibrant pink hair tied in pigtails, dressed in the academy uniform, walked over slowly. She wore a dangerous smile and judged him loudly, disrespectful attitude toward a senior, and destroying public property. As one of the 5-star sovereigns, I cannot turn a blind eye to this. I will personally teach you a lesson. The purple-haired student immediately bowed respectfully. Lady Karina. Seeing the face of the person who had just appeared, Van was completely shocked. The horrific memories of his past life immediately flooded his mind. Wait, isn't this the Princess Knight? That was the insane woman who had taken the lives of thousands on battlefields across the kingdom. Van's crimson eyes contracted in sheer horror when looking at the opponent before him. Why is she here? This unexpected encounter made his heart leap out of his chest because of the terrifying variable. In my first life as an assassin, there were several major riots that shook the kingdom. Standing behind the velvet curtain of those riots was a militaristic faction consisting of remnants of the purification cult. They were known as Blood S, and the most terrifying of them all was Karina of Blood S, a demon swordswoman who had mastered every sword technique and slaughtered countless heroes of the kingdom. The appearance of this mobile guillotine was the spark for the bloody chain of tragedies that followed. Although the kingdom eventually destroyed Blood S at an extremely high cost, the chaos it left behind ignited the brutal war for the throne later on. Even though I had only seen her once on the battlefield in my past life, I couldn't mistake that face. Karina of Blood S. Why is the kingdom's sworn enemy here at the academy as a student? Karina curled her lip and spoke coldly. Another charge to add to the list. Van furrowed his brow in alert. What? Karina rested her chin on her hand, tilting her head to look at Van arrogantly. Just standing there glaring at your senior without saying a word. Don't you think that's rude? Van bowed his head slightly in apology. My apologies. It's just truthfully you don't really look like a senior. Van's blunt words made Karina's eyes narrow dangerously. Oh, is that so? Realizing the air was thick with the smell of gunpowder, Ralph panicked and rushed over, grabbing Van's shoulder to pull him back, shouting, "Stop it, Van! She's one of the 5-star sovereigns!" Van turned confused and asked, 5-star sovereigns, what's that? Van's naive question left Ralph with his jaw dropped in deep shock. You don't even know that! Ralph broke into a cold sweat and hurriedly explained to his friend, the 5 Radiant Star Sovereigns are the 5 top students of this academy. They are a collection of monsters who possess terrifying power and incredible backing. Ralph continued to explain Karina's identity, Karina-senpai included. She enrolled when she was only 13. She really is a monster. Information about this out-of-league character made. Van let out a soft sound of surprise. Oh. Karina smiled arrogantly. Thanks for the introduction. Seeing her attitude, Van broke into a cold sweat. In his heart, he began to piece everything together. So that's it. Blood S actually comes from the high nobility. Her noble status must have been hidden. After she turned into a traitor, I never once thought we'd end up running into each other like this at the academy. Karina swung her sword with arrogant pride. Let me remind you, I have the right to carry a real blade here. Seeing her attack stance, Van immediately recognized it. That was the signature instant draw technique with the willow sword, one of the moves that made Black S famous. She struck so fast that her victims were often dead before they even saw the blade. Sensing the imminent danger, Ralph panicked and shouted, Van, quickly apologize! But Van remained incredibly calm. He gently pushed his friend back. Stay back. Ralph was stunned as Van stepped forward, his eyes burning with a cold crimson intensity, both hands forming a combat stance. There is one thing I need to confirm, Karina said, looking straight at Van with a cold, scornful smile. How foolish. The two stood facing each other in the windswept academy corridor. A burst of killing intent erupted. Karina swung a lightning-fast strike. Even though Van tried to dodge, the blade was too quick, grazing his shoulder and tearing his shirt. Van cried out in pain, and a panicked Ralph screamed, Van, after the lightning attack. Karina coldly sheathed her sword. The violet-haired student beside her stepped forward and asked, "Lady Karina?" Karina stared at Van, who was struggling to get back on his feet. She dismissively waved her hand. "I will postpone your punishment for now. We will settle this another time." Ralph, confused and not understanding what was happening, watched as she turned and walked away. Karina gave a sinister smile, thinking to herself, "This man is too much of a waste to kill in an instant." Van knelt on the ground in silence, his red eyes burning cold. Watching their backs as they moved further down the hall, the violet-haired student curiously asked, "Lady Karina, why did you let him go?" Karina replied coldly, "It wasn't me letting him go." As soon as she finished speaking, her body suddenly faltered. Her blood pressure dropped and she stumbled, having to cling tightly to the student's shoulder. It shocked the girl as Karina fell to the cold stone floor, breathing heavily in pain. The student hurriedly supported her, asking anxiously, "Lady Karina." Karina tried to suppress the pain covering her chest and coldly ordering no further comments. But as her collar shifted slightly, a horrifying charred circular wound was revealed on her chest. Seeing that mysterious mark, her violet-haired attendant was completely shocked and gasped, "What is this?" She recalled records in ancient martial arts books about a technique called pressure point striking, a method of attacking vital spots where many nerves converge in the body. Karina sat slumped, clutching her chest in pain, thinking, this pain will definitely make moving normally very difficult. Seeing Karina's struggle, the attendant asked anxiously, "So was that a mutual destruction move?" Karina was silent for a moment, her eyes narrowing sternly. "Mutual destruction? Not at all." The memory of the fight flashed through her mind. At that exact moment, Karina had poured all her strength into a swing aimed directly at Van's neck, but that man had stepped in without a second of hesitation, intentionally closing the distance to find a weakness to send her to the afterlife. To avoid that lethal strike, Karina had instinctively leaned back, but this caused her blade to deflect and miss its target completely. Meanwhile, Van's finger had stabbed and hit her pressure point precisely. Karina realized this was the principle of simultaneous activation from certain ancient sword schools, a highly difficult technique that requires the user to step forward at the exact same moment as the opponent's attack, performing both defense and offense in a single move. She shuddered, wondering to herself how that man could have mastered such a technique. Seeing Karina deep in thought, the attendant reassured her, "No, that wasn't a mutual destruction at all. Lady Karina is the only one who remained standing after that clash. The winner is clearly you." Karina sighed softly and replied, "That's true." But in her heart, she knew the truth was the exact opposite. The pressure point Van hit, while causing unbearable pain, was not a fatal spot. It wasn't meant to kill. That man. It was unbelievable, but he had intentionally held back and only wanted to warn her. That's why she was unscathed. Karina shuddered, thinking of the worst-case scenario. If this were a real battle, if he had truly intended to take her life, then she would surely be a corpse by now. Karina walked down the hall with a heavy heart, realizing she had completely underestimated her opponent. She gritted her teeth in hatred, thinking, next time, I will definitely be prepared with a sword truly worthy of breaking that man's fangs. Meanwhile, on the other side of the corridor, Van was being helped along by his friend Ralph after the duel. Ralph curiously pressed him, "What was that thing you wanted to confirm earlier?" But Van calmly replied, "That's my own personal business," and told him not to worry about it. Van's indifferent attitude immediately made Ralph snap, grumbling and demanding a proper explanation, because everyone had been so worried. Van fell silent, beginning to analyze Karina in his head. Even though she kept making terrifying threats that actually carried no real killing intent. Furthermore, she hadn't even used the specific magic that was the symbol of her cruelty in her previous life. And realizing that even when she called it a punishment, Karina clearly showed a certain amount of restraint in her attacks. Long story short, they were just testing and probing each other, right? Thinking this, Van unconsciously blurted out, "That girl actually has a somewhat kind side." "I think so." His contradictory remark left Ralph completely frozen. Then he shouted in total shock, "In what way?" Looking ahead, Van silently made up his mind. The current Karina is not yet the murderous Black S. If that's the case, you can totally change her future without having to use your fists to end a life. Van just stood there, dazed and muttering strange things. Ralph could only sigh in frustration, assuming his friend must have been hit on the head hard enough to lose his marbles, and urged him to get to the infirmary immediately. The next day, Van walked into class clutching his books. His arrival immediately stirred up the large classroom. The harsh, judgmental whispers of the students broke out everywhere the moment they saw the Gonda student. Van walked in with a calm face, his crimson eyes quietly observing his surroundings before slowly heading toward his seat. Let it be. I'll do my thing, they do theirs, and that's that. As soon as Van entered the classroom and pulled out his chair, the judgmental murmurs of the students around him erupted immediately. They whispered to each other, looking for gossip. I heard he challenged one of the 5-star kings. A purge is coming. That Gonda guy is too arrogant. Faced with the malicious gossip aimed at him, Van just sighed softly and offered a faint, indifferent smile. Right at that moment, Ralph's loud voice rang out, cutting through the tense atmosphere as Ralph and Fa quickly approached his desk. Don't let those rumors get to you. Those people are just spineless followers who change with the wind, Van replied softly. I really don't mind much, but his two friends remained extremely anxious. Ralph immediately suggested, That's right, I'll go with you to apologize to the senior. Fa, standing beside him, didn't want to be outdone, waving him off and saying, Better yet, let me ask my father to put in a word with the Luthier family. Witnessing their excessive enthusiasm, Van held his head and smiled helplessly. You guys are such busybodies, Ralph asked back, bewildered. Huh, are we? Van nodded nonchalantly. Yeah. Looking at his two friends worrying about him, a warm feeling welled up in Van's heart. He secretly thought it's hard to imagine this, compared to when they first met in the forest. Seeing Van smirk teasingly, Fa shyly scratched his head and muttered, Don't bring that up anymore, that's ancient history. Why are you digging it up? Van stood up. Anyway, I really appreciate your good intentions, but I will handle the matter with Karina myself. Van's firm answer left both Ralph and Faye completely stunned. What in Van's mind at that moment? Images of a bloody future for Karina flashed back. He told himself that to prevent a cruel tragedy in the future, he had to confront Karina right now. Van nonchalantly waved his hand to explain and reassure his friends. Besides, the 5-star kings are just student disciplinary officers. Like school hall monitors, right? There's nothing to be afraid of. Van's foolish level of optimism made Ralph and Fa break into a cold sweat. Ralph helplessly shouted, Do you even realize how dangerous your situation is? Just as the three of them were arguing, a gentle voice suddenly rang out from the classroom door. Could I have a few minutes of your time? The door was pushed open, drawing everyone's attention. Walking into the class was a beautiful female student with honey-toned skin, long, straight black hair, and green eyes. Extremely captivating. She smiled slightly, looked around the class, then directed her gaze toward the Gonda student and called out, Van Kruger, could I have a few minutes of your time? Van, who was sitting at his desk, turned his head and calmly replied, What is it? My class is about to start. Helen smiled sympathetically. I want to talk. It won't take long. Come with me. Van stood up in silence and quietly followed her out of the classroom. Behind their backs, the whispering of the students erupted again in astonishment. Turns out he really knows the ice flower lady, and he's talking to her so naturally, too. What on earth is up with that guy? The two walked to a quiet garden where blue butterflies were fluttering around a round stone table under a classic arched roof. Sitting across from Van, Helen began to broach the topic. Actually, as one of the 5 kings, I have been assigned to test your abilities. Hearing this, Van frowned slightly and replied, You should have told me that sooner. Helen smiled apologetically. I'm sorry, I didn't expect her to act so quickly. Van asked back. Helen nodded, confirming. You mean Karina Luthier, right? Yes. She is the one destined to be the next head of the Luthier family, a family considered the pinnacle of the nobility. Van touched his chin deep in thought. At such a young age and yet carrying such heavy weight, Helen explained further. Yes, her skills are definitely convincing. Van's eyes narrowed, thought, though it seems she isn't just a simple prodigy. Helen curiously pressed, Why do you think so? Van raised his hand to explain. Well, how should I put it? It seems she has thrown everything else away except for her sword. Looking straight into Van's red eyes, Helen squinted, impressed. She commented gently, You are very sharp. It's true she isn't just a blessed prodigy. Originally, Karina was an illegitimate child of the Luthier family. Under normal circumstances, she would never have been able to become a noble. But everything changed completely when she was 10 years old during a random sparring match. Thanks to her innate sword talent, Karina completely defeated her 17-year-old brother, who had been destined as the next heir to the family. She was accepted as the official heir, but the price was too high. Karina had to grow up surrounded by jealousy and hatred from those around her. never once receiving love from her own family. Hearing this, Van wondered, "How do you know so much about this?" Helen smiled softly. "I just happened to hear it. Nobles love to gossip after all." Helen's gaze dimmed and she continued. "And furthermore, before she came to the academy, I saw her once at an evening banquet. At that time, in the middle of the magnificent, bustling banquet hall, Karina stood completely apart from the crowd. She just quietly stood hiding behind a stone pillar, staring fixedly at her father's back. In the distance, her eyes looked so incredibly lonely. Van listened intently and softly asked her why she hadn't tried to strike up a conversation with her. Helen lowered her eyes, a hint of sadness passing through, and replied, "Back then I couldn't. Both of us came from prestigious noble houses, and the status barriers didn't allow us to approach each other easily. If I had shown empathy toward Karina at that time, it could have been seen as rude interference in the internal affairs of another family." Hearing this, Van leaned back in his chair. He clicked his tongue and remarked, "Nobles are such a pain." Helen nodded in agreement. "Right. Back then I was bound by those kinds of constraints, even though Karina didn't seem to remember any of that. But I have a feeling that if things keep going like this, one day that girl will surely lose her way." Van glanced at her and asked, "What will you do if that actually happens?" Helen's gaze suddenly became incredibly resolute. "I want to stop her. The fact that I looked the other way back then has always been a haunting obsession that has followed me all this time." Seeing Helen's expression, Van fell into deep thought. So that's how it is. He began to reevaluate the strength of the girl before him. Helen's magical power was truly terrifying even when compared to the heroes that Van had encountered in his previous life. She was by no means inferior to them, yet he had never heard the name Helen Steinass in his previous life. Van pieced everything together and quickly realized a heartbreaking truth surely in his previous life. Helen had stood up alone to stop Karina after she became the murderer of Brad Ash, and the result of that effort was that Helen had to pay with her own life. She died in silence under Karina's brutal blade, never given a chance for the world to know her name, returning to reality. Helen sighed and warned Van in a serious tone. "I'm telling you these things, but don't let sympathy cloud your judgment. Karina's swordsmanship is the real deal. If you're careless, she really might kill you." "Wow. Aren't you underestimating me a little, friend?" Contrary to Helen's worry, Van broke into a confident smile. "I know that. Hearing this story only gives me more motivation." Van looked straight into her green eyes and declared firmly, "Your regrets, I will shatter them. In my past life, no one could stop the monster named Karina. But this time is different. I've come back, and I will definitely break her twisted power to put an end to this tragedy." Seeing the confidence and steely determination radiating from his fellow student from the Gonda clan, Helen completely froze, unable to do anything but stare at him in amazement. Hearing Van's resolute words, Helen bowed her head slightly and said softly, "Those words are truly welcome, or rather, perhaps I was hoping you would say that." Yet she couldn't help but ask anxiously, "But do you have any countermeasures for her swordsmanship yet?" Asking this might be a bit late, but Van smiled confidently. "Of course I do. Perfect timing. After class, stay behind and spar with me." As soon as classes ended, on a tree-lined path in the academy courtyard, two students, Ralph and Faye, were sneakily tailing them. Ralph looked around, muttering, "Where did Van go?" He peeked through the bushes and asked sheepishly, "Hey, Fa, isn't this going a bit too far, sneaking around like this? But aren't you curious?" As soon as class ended, he disappeared with the ice flower lady. Well, that's true. They moved deeper into the trees and suddenly spotted Van's back. Ralph exclaimed, "Oh, they're over there," but right after that, a massive storm of ice suddenly erupted violently from the opposite side. Helen was concentrating her magic, launching sharp, sweeping waves of ice everywhere. Witnessing that terrifying scene, Ralph and Fa scrambled in panic, hitting the ground and shouting, "Whoa, what the heck are you two doing?" Man trying to eavesdrop and ending up face-planted like this is a bit embarrassing, friend. Amidst the blizzard, Helen, with her sharp green eyes, smiled excitedly. She concentrated a massive sphere of magic in her hands and shouted, "Where are you looking?" Instantly, she unleashed her ultimate technique, Hell's Thousand Ice Thorns. Massive, razor-sharp ice spikes went wild, freezing and devastating the surrounding ground. Ralph and Faye, standing on the sidelines, felt the powerful shockwave and could only scream in terror, facing the danger. Van's blood-red eyes narrowed. He immediately stepped forward, shielding his two friends, using his bare hands to directly block and shatter the massive ice spikes charging at them. Van's timely protection left his two friends who were sitting on the ground completely stunned. Huh. Van turned his head slightly to look at them and casually called out, "You two over there?" Ralph was dumbfounded. Van looked back at his friends with a bright, confident smile. He waved his hand and said nonchalantly, "Perfect timing. Next, join in and let's attack together. Since you've arrived, you might as well join in, right?" In the magnificent hallway of the academy, the 8th prince, Honest Farania, walked slowly behind Karina and called out to her, "Hey, Karina." When the pink-haired girl turned and asked if he needed something, Honest got straight to the point. "I don't mean to rush you, but I'm curious. When do you plan on dealing with that Gonda fellow we talked about?" Karina replied nonchalantly. "Soon enough. The thing I requested from the family has finally arrived." Honest's curiosity was quickly satisfied when from behind her, a purple-haired attendant struggled to drag a massive coffin tightly bound in heavy iron chains. Panting with exhaustion, the attendant asked respectfully, "My lady, where should I take this?" Karina coldly commanded, "Take it to my room. Handle it with extreme care." Seeing the mysterious chained-up coffin, Honest's expression shifted slightly, muttering to himself, I've heard rumors about this before." The prince turned to Karina skeptical. "Do you think this is a bit much for a Gonda?" Karina answered firmly. "Not at all." Honest smirked, looking sinister. "For someone like you, a human-shaped blade, there's no stage more fitting than this." Immediately after an official announcement from the 5 Star Lords was posted on the Academy bulletin board, grabbing the attention of numerous students. "I, Karina Luthier, one of the 5 Star Lords, by this document challenge the first-year student, Van Kruger, to a duel as punishment for disrupting the public order." The location for the match was the Academy's Grand Arena, commonly known as the White Ring Arena. This was a sacred ground used only for official duels between students and special trials. Standing in the middle of the vast arena under the clear blue sky, Van was casually warming up, stretching his arms to get ready for the coming fight. The stands quickly packed with people eager to watch. Sitting amidst the bustling crowd, Fa looked around and remarked uneasily, "The atmosphere here seems incredibly gloomy." He turned to Ralph, saying that in truth no one here thinks this will be a real duel. Sitting right next to them, Helen Stein A.S. spoke up to explain, "This isn't a duel, it's a punishment." That's right. In the eyes of the entire Academy, a battle between a powerful 5-star lord and a magicless Gonda can only be a one-sided slaughter. That was what everyone secretly assumed. However, Ralph gave a cold, confident scoff. "Maybe that's the conventional way of looking at it. But we know better than anyone Van isn't someone you can measure by common standards." Hearing this, Helen smiled slightly, looking up at the high balcony, and continued, "It seems that guy over there thinks the same as you." Her gaze was fixed on the 9th Prince Henry, who was also standing up high, observing the arena. Not far away, the 8th Prince Honest Farania was sitting with his arms crossed, looking very serious. Why would a figure of his caliber bother coming to watch such a trivial match? Just then, from the dark entrance of the arena, a loud noise broke the murmuring crowd. A terrifying presence was slowly emerging, making Helen, Ralph, Fa, and the entire audience in the stands startle and look down in shock. Karina stepped into the arena, personally dragging the heavy iron chain connected to a massive coffin. Ancient and intricately carved, the appearance of this bizarre object instantly caused the stands to buzz. A male student exclaimed in confusion, "What on earth is that?" Even Helen broke into a cold sweat in surprise. "Don't tell me she really brought that thing out here." The giant chain-wrapped coffin was placed looming in the center of the arena before the eyes of thousands. Van saw the coffin and his expression shifted slightly, but he quickly regained his composure, even offering a provocative smile. "A coffin for me, how thoughtful," replying to the taunt. Karina didn't say a word. She swung the chain hard, slamming the coffin upright onto the stone floor with great force. Karina coldly commanded, "Enough joking around." The coffin opened to reveal an arsenal filled with sharp swords emitting a glowing red magic. Karina declared, "This coffin is too good for someone like you." Witnessing the terrifying surge of magic, Van stood stunned in amazement. That's a sword coffin, a mobile arsenal passed down by the sword saints of the Luthier family. Its appearance made the students in the stands tremble and whisper, what on earth were the sword saints thinking to create something so terrifying? Karina slowly reached out to grab a hilt, drawing a brilliant blade. She pointed the tip straight at Van, her bloodlust surging. "I will make you regret that a Gonda like you dared to step foot into this academy." Facing that immense pressure, Van didn't flinch at all. He reached his hand forward, his red eyes flashing with defiance as he countered, "Aren't you the one who should be regretting I'm going to smash that precious coffin of yours to pieces?" Van smirked, asking, "So how do we signal the start?" Karina's eyes hardened and she coldly declared, "It's already started." Immediately, at the 0.1-second warning, Karina lunged forward, swinging her sword in a lightning-fast downward strike aimed straight at Van. Van didn't flinch. I instantly activated his footwork, moving with terrifying speed and leaving faint after-images. In the blink of an eye, Van was right in front of Karina, leaving her completely stunned. He threw a powerful direct punch, forcing Karina to hurriedly block the blow with her blade. Van smirked, taunting, "Just as I expected. Nice reflexes." Karina glared at her opponent, highly alert. Sparks flew between them as Van's fist remained locked against her sword. Witnessing Van's incredible movement speed, the crowd in the stands immediately erupted. A student shouted in confusion, "So fast, is that instant teleportation?" But another student immediately dismissed it. "Don't be stupid. That's a Ganda. He shouldn't be able to do anything. No matter how many times I look at it, it looks exactly like magic." Fa exclaimed the name of the technique, Phantom Step. Sitting right next to him, Helen confirmed, "I heard it's called that." Ralph couldn't help but ask, "What the hell is that anyway?" Helen slowly explained the operating principles of this footwork. Usually, when someone wants to move forward, they are forced to kick off the ground to gain momentum. And that very action unintentionally creates a telltale preparation that makes it easy for the opponent to react, but Van doesn't need to kick off the ground at all. He glides his entire body forward by controlling his center of gravity and utilizing the rotational force of his hips that is the true essence of the Phantom Step. Hearing the detailed explanation, Ralph and his friend beside him just break into a cold sweat and laugh it off. "Even after hearing that, I still don't understand a thing." Faye sighs in agreement. Regardless, it's a footwork technique that even we can't see through from this distance. It's as fast as an autumn breeze. Helen nods slightly and continues, "That's right," to Karina. "When that footwork is performed right in front of her, it looks just like teleportation." Helen's expression darkens as memories of the practice match in the forest come flooding back. "When I first saw it in the Ganda forest, I thought the exact same thing." Back to the fight in the arena. Van continues to corner Karina at an extremely close range. Witnessing his friend's overwhelming dominance, Ralph excitedly shouts, "Great moves! Van has an absolute advantage at close range." Faye nods in agreement. At such a point-blank distance, a greatsword can't be swung normally. Karina suddenly unleashes a powerful downward slash from above. The tremendous force of the strike pushes Van back, not giving his opponent a moment to catch their breath. Karina coldly swings her sword repeatedly. Even though Van dodges nimbly, the terrifying speed of the blade grazes his arm and he feels a sharp sting. Van clicks his tongue and quickly slides backward to keep a safe distance. Karina stands tall, looking at Van with contempt and speaks up, "If you get close, you won't get cut." "Is that what you thought?" Facing his opponent's confidence, Van doesn't flinch. He smirks excitedly. Now that's what makes it interesting. In the stands, a student immediately recognizes Karina's stance and exclaims in surprise, half-swording, "It's a practical combat technique where the swordsman uses one hand to grip the ricasso, the unsharpened part near the hilt of a greatsword, to increase control and thrust at extremely close range. I heard this technique is very common on the battlefield. But it's definitely not something a noble lady would learn. It seems the rumor that she is the next sword saint isn't just a reputation." However, Helen Steenis, sitting nearby, muses thoughtfully. "But facing Van, she would have been better off leaving that trick at home." Instantly, Van moves as fast as a ghost, closing in on Karina in a split second, channeling force into his fist. He lands a massive blow directly onto her blade. The terrifying shockwave from Van's punch travels straight through the sword, completely breaking her balance and sending Karina reeling backward. With her face full of shock and unable to say a word, Van continuously unleashes a barrage of unarmed strikes, closing the distance and cornering Karina, leaving her struggling. She uses her sword to defend and is constantly pushed back by the lightning-fast punches. Witnessing the situation in the arena, the 8th Prince, Honest Farania, sits with his arms crossed in the stands and comments, "She's just taking hits." For magic swordsmen, dodging attacks that contain no magical power is extremely difficult. That is why Van's purely physical strikes become unpredictable attacks to them. Being constantly pressured, Karina roars angrily, "So what?" She immediately activates a brilliant pink magical aura, covering her entire body, for defense, confidently declaring, "There is no way." that punches with just physical strength can pierce my magical barrier. However, before she can finish her sentence, Karina freezes completely, her eyes wide with shock. Her body suddenly stiffens, forcing her to plant her greatsword into the ground to keep her balance. She is bewildered, not understanding what is happening to her body, clutching her head, which is in intense pain. Karina grinds her teeth and demands, "What the hell did you do?" Van calmly replies with a sarcastic tone, "Who knows? Perhaps your ability to control magical power is a bit loose." The provocation makes Karina extremely angry, her eyes narrowing with hatred. In reality, the thing that caused her to fall into such a pathetic state was Van's secret technique. By using the intense wind pressure generated from a precise palm strike, the attack transmitted a shockwave directly into her semicircular canals, located deep inside the ear. It completely destroyed the opponent's sense of balance. Karina's sudden weakness causes the whole stands to erupt in chaos. The students cannot help but worry and whisper, "What is going on here? Is Lady Karina being cornered?" From the stands, the 8th prince. Honest Farania cannot maintain his composure. He loses it and roars in humiliation. "What the hell are you doing, Karina? Is that how you call yourself a noble?" Seeing his opponent struggling on her knees, Van gets into a fighting stance and coldly suggests, "Shall we end this early?" Witnessing her master's perilous situation, the purple-haired maid in the stands screams in panic, "Lady Karina!" With 1 second of hesitation, Van dashes like an arrow, aiming straight at Karina to deliver the final blow, but at that very moment, Karina slightly lifts her head. Her crimson eyes flare with insane and brutal killing intent. A giant pillar of pink magic suddenly explodes violently, tearing the sky and crushing the entire arena floor. Everything around her is reduced to rubble. Amidst the ruined debris, Karina stands tall within an aura of pink magic, her power erupting in terror. The students in the stands are completely panicked, screaming non-stop, "What just happened? Did she lose her mind or something?" Standing amidst the debris, Van breaks into a cold sweat as he feels the immense pressure. All she did was swing a sword filled with magical power. Yet even without a direct hit, the shockwave still shook him to the bone. Seeing the blazing pink mana surrounding his opponent, Van immediately understands the true reason. That is exactly why the generations of sword saints needed this sword casket. Karina held her sword high, a brilliant pink aura crackling with dangerous purple lightning. She was clearly activating her ultimate move, the Heaven-Fallen Blade. She wore a confident smirk, but she bluntly pointed out a flaw. "But as you can see, this sword can't withstand this much power for long. That's its only weakness." Seeing this, the 8th prince. Honest Farania watched from the stands with an intrigued grin. "Karina, huh? So she's been holding back this whole time." Her purple-haired attendant stood behind her, respectfully chiming in. Indeed, anyone hit by that attack would be reduced to ashes. Yet facing that blade of destruction aimed straight at him, Van calmly advised, "You should treat your weapon with more care, you know." Hearing Van's advice, Karina smiled arrogantly. "I'll do that." Her crimson eyes burned with fierce resolve as she loudly declared, "I'll end this match with my next strike." Karina instantly activated 3 massive concentric magic circles, unleashing a pillar of energy. The colossal pink magic lit up the entire arena. Facing that world-ending power, Van dropped his center of gravity into a defensive stance. Watching Karina's surging bloodlust, a student in the stands was completely panicked. Wait, is she actually trying to kill him? But a noble next to them just offered a cold, dismissive laugh. That's just the proper punishment for a Gonda who dares to defy the nobility. If that move connects, he's definitely dead, Ralph shouted in a panic. Stay calm, as long as it's not a direct hit. What if Van uses his phantom step technique? But Helen Stevens just stared deep in thought. Let's see, she mused. Even if Van's attacks land, they aren't strong enough to take down Karina in a single blow. Meanwhile, her heaven-fallen blade has enough power to wipe Van out in an instant. Helen continued her analysis. In other words, Karina can afford to take a hit from Van, just to find an opening to unleash that heaven-fallen blade at point-blank range. At such close proximity, even if Van could dodge a direct strike, just the shockwave from the magical explosion would be enough to end the life of someone completely without defensive magic like him. Ralph looked down at the arena, deeply worried. What are you planning, Van? Down below. Karina stared coldly at her opponent and spoke. I'll warn you one last time. Karina raised her sword high and commanded firmly, accept your lowly status, befitting your origins. Do that and I'll spare your life. Hearing this, Van shrugged. You're really obsessed with this status thing, aren't you? Karina immediately asserted, of course. Our magical power is determined by our bloodline. That is the very foundation of this kingdom's order. Van offered a cynical, mocking smile. Ha! A textbook answer from the nobility. But tell me, do you honestly think that trying to act like a noble will actually turn you into one? Van's question left Karina stunned for a moment before she flew into a rage, screaming, "What did you say?" Van looked straight into her eyes, coldly exposing the truth. "I know everything. You're actually the child of a commoner, aren't you?" Karina's face turned ghostly pale. Van kept the pressure on with sharp, cutting words. "That's why you're trying so desperately to become a true noble, right? It's all just so your dear father will finally acknowledge you, isn't it?" Van's words hit her deepest emotional wound, bringing back painful memories of standing alone as a child watching her father from afar. Karina lost all control. Her eyes rolled back in fury and she screamed maniacally. Her extreme rage caused the pink magic to erupt more violently than ever, creating a massive formation, glowing brilliantly beneath Karina's feet. Seeing this terrifying sight, Ralph asked in confusion, "What are they talking about?" Contrary to Ralph's ignorance, Helen watched quietly and realized Van's true intention. He was deliberately provoking her. He wanted to force her to unleash a serious, all-out attack without holding back. Ralph broke into a cold sweat, intently watching Van's defensive stance, and realized an even more shocking truth. He's planning to use that technique. That's right. I am an outsider who wandered into the world of nobility. Childhood memories of distance flooded back into Karina's mind as she looked down at the Academy's grand hall from a high balcony. Because of that, even though you're a Ganda, I felt a sense of kinship with you. That's why I volunteered to challenge you, planning to settle this without taking your life. But that compassion was quickly extinguished by the fires of resentment. Karina hardened her face, radiating murderous intent. She roared, "But you don't even know how to appreciate that kindness. If even you dare to humiliate me." The brilliant pink magic flared violently, engulfing the greatsword. Karina screamed like a madwoman, "Then come at me! I will kill you as you wish!" Facing her opponent's fury, Van didn't flinch. He poured his strength into a dash forward, replying, "Fine then. If you're so hungry for it, then come and get me." Karina swung her sword filled with destructive magical power, bringing it down with all her might. Her ultimate technique, Heaven's Punishment. The massive downward strike created a cataclysmic explosion. The ground shattered, debris flying everywhere amidst the hazy dust. But just as the dust began to clear, Karina was utterly shocked. What? Revealed in the white smoke, Van was holding the giant blade back with his bare hands. The unthinkable sight left the entire crowd breathless. The students screamed in shock. He disarmed the weapon with his bare hands. No way. That technique could never work in a real fight. Blocking a downward sword strike with just your bare hands is practically impossible. What Van just did is, first he adjusted his hand speed to perfectly match the falling speed of the blade. At the very moment of contact, Van started to dampen the force. In that split second before the strike was completed, he completely dispersed and absorbed all its kinetic energy. This secret technique is called steel grip. This is also the exact technique Van used earlier to make all of Helen's ice spears drop. The heavenly sword style is a truly terrifying technique, but its overwhelming power is its own weakness. Seeing her blade completely nullified, Karina gasped in shock. No way. Not giving his opponent a chance to recover, Van's crimson eyes flashed with a cold light. He poured all his power into a massive ice strike, a direct punch that unleashed a terrifying shockwave. It sent Karina flying backward. She skidded across the stone floor before slamming hard into her own sword coffin. This spectacular turnaround left all the students in the stands completely stunned into silence. Karina dropped to her knees, coughing up blood in pain. Whispers erupted across the arena. The Sword Princess has been defeated. Is this really the power of a Ganda tribesman witnessing this scene? The eighth prince. Honest Farania gritted his teeth in frustration, while her purple-haired attendant nervously called out, "Lady Karina." Unlike the silence of the noble crowd, Raph and Fee cheered excitedly. "Amazing, don't let your guard down, Van, keep attacking." Karina knelt on the ground beside her glowing sword coffin, gasping in pain. She looked up at Van and demanded, "Why didn't you finish me off? Don't tell me you're going easy on me." Van stood tall and imposing. He looked calmly at his opponent and replied firmly, "No, but I have no intention of bullying a second-rate noble lady." Van's words made Karina grit her teeth in rage, but then Van held out his hand. He challenged her bluntly. You haven't shown me everything yet, have you? Come on, show me the real. Karina faced with such arrogant words. Karina bit her lip until it bled, a surge of extreme fury rising within her. She roared, "Such arrogance!" From her massive sword coffin behind her, a brilliant pink magic circle erupted violently. This sudden change threw the entire audience into chaos. The students were incredibly confused, breaking out in cold sweat, whispering, "Has she really drawn that thing out?" Frightened murmurs spread. "Are you serious? That sword is... Even though I'm not a swordsman, I've heard rumors about it." Watching from above, Helen Steins spoke up with a grave expression. "That's right. That is one of the most famous swords in this kingdom. The signature blade of the Sword Saint. It is a spring-loaded sword forged from a special metal extremely thin and flexible." Watching Karina holding the flimsy blade, emitting a brilliant pink, magical aura, Van's crimson eyes contracted slightly as the brutal memories of his past life flooded back. He recognized this terrifying weapon. It was known as the Bloody Chain Massacre Sword. Karina, with a face full of murderous, crazed intent and wild eyes, roared with hatred, "Then I'll show you what I had to go through just to stand here, facing the ultimate power exploding from his opponent." Van did not waver. With a crimson killing intent surrounding his body, he smiled resolutely and replied, "Fine by me." Karina unleashed her full power. She swung her sword, creating a brilliant pink magic circle, and yelled, "This is my full power. If you think you can withstand it, come and try." A massive storm of blades erupted violently, sweeping across the arena and destroying the ground beneath their feet. Witnessing that destructive power, the students in the stands were completely shocked, shouting, "What the hell is that? Is that even swordsmanship?" Watching from afar, Amelia Rodenwood explained in a serious tone, "The national secret technique, soul calling song. That circle is an ultimate technique that only a few people in the Lutton family can reach. It amplifies the blade's flexibility, with magic pushing the sword's tip to supersonic speeds." Facing the raging, fiery, magical gale in front of him, Van acted as if nothing was wrong. Karina continued to declare arrogantly, "The dance of the circle spares no one who enters its territory. Whether it is fire or lightning, it cuts everything down just the same. Soon this range will expand to cover the entire arena. If you want to forfeit and run, I'll allow it, but if you stay there, won't be a single bone left of you." However, Van smirked coldly and replied, "No need to go through the trouble of expanding it. I'll just come to you myself." Having said that, Van walked decisively straight into the roaring blade storm. He thought to himself, fast but not completely invisible. Van's crimson eyes focused intensely. He began to analyze the trajectory of the slashes. Facing the massive blade storm engulfing him, Van activated his special ability, Tachysaikia, the phenomenon of slowed time perception. This is where the brain's processing speed accelerates dramatically under extreme pressure, a natural human defense mechanism, intended to find the optimal path of survival amidst a massive sea of information. While ordinary people only accidentally experience this at random, Van had completely mastered it and could consciously activate this ability at will. His crimson eyes opened wide with focus. He poured strength into his legs and shouted decisively, "Let's do this, Van!" He lunged straight into Karina's glowing storm of blades. Amidst the pink streaks of light flashing crazily, he moved fluidly and used his bare hands to directly parry. The supersonic sword strikes with precision. The deafening sounds of impact rang out repeatedly, leaving the entire audience stunned. Standing from above, the eighth Prince Honest was completely dumbfounded. He actually managed to parry it. Van's crimson eyes focused intensely on the trajectory of the blade. He quickly deciphered the mechanics behind this weapon. The center of gravity for a spring sword is always at the tip. Don't get distracted by its complex movements. All you need to do is just swat the tip of the blade down. Witnessing her ultimate technique being neutralized so easily, Karina leaped back onto the magic circle, teeth gritted in shock. "So that's how it is. You're a monster too. It looks like we're evenly matched then." But Van immediately shouted, denying it. "No, I've just worked harder than most people, that's all. Just like you." Van's assertion left Karina's stunned eyes widening in disbelief. "What did you say?" Van understood the cruelty of this weapon. The spring sword chooses its master. Anyone lacking true mastery will be slashed by the blade itself. Simply being born into a line of swordsmen. is not enough to reach this level. Van looked straight at his opponent, asking clearly, "Just how many years have you poured into that sword anyway?" Van's heavy question struck straight at Karina's mind, leaving her completely stunned. Her eyes widened in shock and a bitter feeling welled up inside her. "I haven't even stopped to think about that, not even once." A distant memory suddenly came rushing back, taking Karina back to those lonely childhood days when she was just a tiny child sitting and hugging her knees all alone under the quiet porch. Just once in all of Karina's memories, she remembered the moment her father personally taught her how to sword fight. Perhaps to him it was just a spur-of-the-moment whim, but in that very second, little Karina truly felt the sacred bond between father and daughter. Her father's gentle face and her own radiant smile back then, it felt like it would last forever. But after that time, it never happened again. Busy with political affairs, her father had absolutely no time to care for an illegitimate child. Watching her father, happy with his legitimate family, Karina could only stand silently behind the wall, watching in loneliness. From then on, she decided she had to perfect her swordsmanship. If she could become stronger than anyone else, then surely her father and the family would have to acknowledge her existence. She went through days of training, as grueling as hell, frantically swinging the heavy wooden sword until she collapsed exhausted on the cold ground. Karina finally became too strong. She easily defeated those who looked down on her, to everyone's amazement. From that day on, the looks of contempt directed at her completely vanished. But in return, Karina began to live in constant fear and hatred from those around her. The warmth in her father's eyes back then had also completely disappeared. In its place was a look of chilling, terrifying distance. He recognized her as a legal heir, a child of a mistress. And that was all he could do to maintain peace for the family, to suppress the legitimate children and console his wife. Even turning his back on Karina was his correct choice. Watching her father's cold back walk away with his official family, leaving her all alone with her sword in hand, Karina understood that she had been completely abandoned. That was also when she realized she had nothing left but this sword. So that no one could deny her existence, she had to prove her worth through absolute power. That was the only path for her to gain recognition from her father and her family. Karina screamed in a fury, "And you, what the hell do you know about me to run your mouth like that?" A massive burst of magic power exploded, creating a pink storm of blades accompanied by intense purple lightning sweeping across the arena. Supersonic slashes grazed Van. Van gritted his teeth, enduring the pain, but his steps never stopped. Watching his opponent persistently advance through the zone of destruction, Karina couldn't help but be shocked and amazed. In the stands, the students screamed in panic. "Is he advancing right through that storm of slashes?" Karina was completely bewildered. She broke into a cold sweat and shouted helplessly, Why must you try that hard? Everyone else has run away from my sword, so why do you, someone with absolutely no magic, refuse to step back even as blood flows from your forehead and all over your body?" Van, with his crimson eyes full of determination, continued to stride proudly straight toward Karina amidst the roaring magic lightning. He calmly replied, "To prevent a future uprising." But that wasn't all. In Van's mind, painful memories of his previous life flashed when his power was exploited by villains, only to end in a tragedy where he lost everything. He loudly asserted, "To have the strength you've worked so hard for be exploited by wicked people only to end up with nothing, that pain I know better than anyone. Someone is crying all alone in the middle of this storm. How could I possibly just leave them alone?" Karina immediately countered, full of anger, "I am not crying." But Van cut her off immediately. "No, you are crying. Your sword is screaming for you. Isn't this enough yet? Why won't you people acknowledge me? That's what it's screaming." Van's words were like a bucket of ice water poured straight onto her soul, leaving Karina completely stunned. She gritted her teeth in fury and roared, "You? What the hell do you know about me?" "This is all I have to become stronger than anyone else with this blade." Driven by a frantic desire to force her entire clan to bow before her, Karina swung her sword with such intensity that it unleashed a massive glowing pink magic formation even while suffering from grazing slashes. Despite bleeding from countless wounds, Van remained steadfast. He smiled gently, his voice calm and forgiving as he said, "I don't know everything, but listen to me, Karina." Van looked straight into her wavering eyes and asserted that her worth was not defined by anyone else. His words left Karina completely stunned. Her pink eyes widened in shock as Van slowly stepped forward onto the cracked stone floor, speaking clearly, "All the sweat and tears you've shed when no one was watching, and the weight of every strike you've endured as if carved into your very soul, no one can deny that value, even if not a single person acknowledges it. Then at the very least, to me, you are the most brilliant magic swordsman. Van's sincere declaration sent a shiver down her spine, leaving Karina completely frozen. Those words unknowingly awakened a deep memory she thought had long been forgotten. In Karina's mind, the image of her kind father appeared. He gently hugged little Karina from behind, holding her hands over her training sword and calmly instructed, "Listen closely, Karina. Even when striking down an enemy, never swing your sword out of anger or hatred." The innocent face of young Karina listened intently to her father's lesson while he smiled down at her with gentle affection. With eyes full of warmth, he added, "Live with nobility. Even in the heat of battle, always keep your pride in your heart. This is the sword of the Luthier clan." Back to the brutal reality of the arena. Amidst the thick dust and deep cracks in the stone floor, the two were still locked in a fierce struggle. A single tear rolled down Karina's cheek. Falling in silence, she tearfully realized that this was what her father had tried to teach her all those years ago. The true meaning of pride was not something to beg for or receive as recognition from others. It was something she had to carry in her heart, learning the blade to protect her own self. "I see. I was the one who threw away the precious lesson my father gave me." With a moment of hesitation, Karina let go, letting her old sword fall to the ground. "Thank you, Van Kruger. You've helped me remember." Van, his face covered in blood, remained silent, calmly watching her as Karina turned around and walked toward the massive sword coffin. It was radiating a brilliant aura. She reached out and gripped the hilt of a new sword, a vibrant pink magical energy erupting with noble intensity. It engulfed the sharp blade as she declared, "This time I will pour everything into this single strike." "Then you block it?" Van looked at his opponent, offering a confident, cheerful smile in response. "I would be honored to serve you, my lady." Without a second of hesitation, Karina lunged forward, swinging her sword in a downward strike. It was simple. Yet it wasn't an ordinary blow. It was a strike that had reached the pinnacle of perfection, accurately recreating the technique her father had personally taught her when she was young, the only technique he ever showed her. Facing that pure, hatred-free blade, Karina smiled peacefully, and seeing that Van felt incredibly exhilarated. His red eyes widened as he realized, "So this is your true self." The strike came down, unleashing a powerful pink-violet energy that caused a massive shockwave across the arena. But as the dust settled, Karina was the one kneeling. She braced herself with her sword and helplessly admitted her total defeat. "Thank you, Van." Van smiled brightly, stepping closer and reaching out his hand to Karina with deep respect. "The pleasure was mine. That was truly a magnificent strike, Karina." The entire arena fell silent for a moment at the unexpected result before amazed whispers began to erupt throughout the stands. Was one of the 5-star sovereigns just defeated? By a first-year student and a Gonda clan member, no less. The applause quickly spread, turning into cheers that echoed throughout the grand arena. Amidst the ruins, Van gently took Karina's hand, marking a new, peaceful beginning between the two. A day after the shocking duel, Van was leisurely strolling through the academy campus with his two friends, Ralph and Fa. Seeing Van completely healthy, Ralph asked in astonishment. "Hey, Van, are your wounds already fully healed?" Van casually adjusted his collar and smiled, replying, "Yeah, the healing mage fixed me up without leaving a single scar." Ralph excitedly raised his fist and shouted, "Oh my God! Yesterday was unbelievable. I still can't believe you actually won." Beside them, Fa nodded in agreement, remembering the moment Van took Karina's hand in the arena. "That's right, that battle will definitely go down in the Academy's history." But Van just sighed and laughed it off. "You guys are exaggerating. It was just a normal duel after all." Hearing Van's indifferent answer, Faye immediately lost his cool and yelled, "Just a duel, no way. A first-year student defeating one of the 5-star sovereigns." Before he could finish, Fa suddenly stopped, his eyes wide as he looked forward. "Wait a second." Ralph also panicked, pointing, "Hey, look over there!" There, in the shade of an old tree, a familiar figure stood with arms crossed, quietly waiting. Contrary to his friend's panic, Van remained incredibly calm. He smiled faintly and remarked, "Oh, it's her. She doesn't look like a loser at all, does she? Recovered fast." Seeing Karina standing ahead, Ralph panicked to the extreme. Cold sweat poured down his face. "What, don't tell me she came here for immediate revenge?" Fa hurriedly tried to reassure his friend, even though he was trembling himself. Calm down. Yesterday's duel was official, so she can't just attack him out of nowhere. Amidst the tense atmosphere, Van approached with an incredibly nonchalant air, casually raising a hand with a bright, sunny greeting. Morning, Senior Karina. Karina narrowed her eyes at Van, her voice cold. You're a bit late with your greeting. As always, he clearly needed a little attitude adjustment. Van just gave a wry smile and replied, My bad. Is this another punishment? Karina's face flickered with a moment of hesitation. Well, I really don't want to do this. But immediately after, Karina suddenly whipped around, pointed a finger right in Van's face, and declared for everyone to hear, shock radiating from the crowd, Van Kruger, I am making you my squire. The sudden declaration left Van and his two friends gaping, only able to stammer, A squire is usually a term for a young person serving a knight to learn the ways of chivalry. But here at the Royal Academy, it's a specific system. It's where senior students directly mentor and supervise underclassmen they have a special interest in. In other words, Karina was looking to apply this privilege to Van. The pink-haired girl stood with hands on her hips, smugly declaring, Starting today, I, in the name of the radiant 5-star lords, will personally guide and correct your behavior. Hearing this, cold sweat began to bead on Van's forehead. His face twisted in dismay as he asked to be sure. So, you mean from now on, I have to be under your supervision? While Van was still feeling uneasy, his two friends whispered to each other. Actually, that's not a bad deal. Think about it, no one in this academy will dare touch Van now. Once he's under the personal protection of the Sword Princess, he's set. Rap's logic made Faye realize it instantly. Oh, Van glanced at his two friends and thought to himself, so that's how it is. But is he really about to put a yoke around his own neck? Guys, seriously? Sensing what everyone was thinking. Van scratched his head and offered an awkward, apologetic smile. I really appreciate the kind gesture, but Karina immediately cut him off. She tilted her chin up, looking arrogant and smug. You should feel honored. I am personally taking you under my wing, not even letting Van react. Karina pointed straight ahead with a devious smirk and commanded, Now first things first, kneel down right there, and swear your loyalty as a squire. Her somewhat dictatorial demand left. Rap and Faye standing behind them completely speechless, their faces blank with shock. Van bowed his head slightly, flashed a polite, charming smile, and replied calmly, I am extremely grateful for your concern, Senior. But immediately after he poured a bucket of cold water on the situation, however, I must decline. Before Karina could even process it, Van had already spun on his heels and bolted, running for his life. Peace out. Running away is the best strategy. Karina stood frozen, only able to gasp and shout in utter astonishment. What did you just say? As he ran, Van was sweating bullets, telling himself, I can't stand being supervised by anyone. Watching the back of the first-year student fading into the distance, Karina snapped. Her face flushed red with anger as she raised her hand and shouted helplessly. Hey, you get back here! Karina screamed, chasing after him. Wait, you dare run away from my guidance! Witnessing this ridiculous scene, Ralph and Fa could only stand frozen in bewilderment, muttering, Hey, the Sword Princess! Don't tell me she's actually... No way, right? Meanwhile, in a luxurious noble meeting room, a fist slammed angrily against the table. The 8th prince gritted his teeth, his grip tightening. What an absolute humiliation. One of the 5-star lords defeated by some lowly Ganda. This is basically a slap in the face to all of nobility. At first I thought this was Helen's little performance. By forcing something as absurd as enrolling a Ganda, she just wanted to flaunt her influence. He gnashed his teeth, his face twisted in resentment. But now that this Ganda has defeated Karina, the situation has completely changed. Someone without magic actually surpassed a noble. Do you people even understand how terrifying this precedent is? The hierarchy based on magic power is the absolute order that allows nobles to lead the people and the royal family to rule this land. And yet that woman is trying to destroy the very foundation of it. This is clearly an attack on the entire noble class. Van Kruger, who in the world taught him those techniques? Clink. The sound of Amelia setting down her teacup cut through everyone's train of thought. She spoke nonchalantly, That worry is completely unfounded, Prince Leonius. Leonius raised an eyebrow and turned back. Oh. Amelia took a calm sip of her tea. Her crimson eyes revealed a sense of composure and arrogance. Van Kruger's techniques could never pose any real threat to us nobles, Amelia explained slowly. Duels are in essence nothing more than one-on-one games. What we nobles need is the power to be a shield for the people and a massive hammer to crush the enemy's armies. In her mind, a scene of a brutal battlefield appeared, where tens of thousands of ferocious magic beasts were roaring madly. Amelia argued with disdain, against a horde of magic beasts like that. What could someone with absolutely no magic like Van possibly do? At best, he's only suited for solo combat like a rat crawling in the shadows. He can never ever replace the nobles, the pillars that carry this entire nation. Leonius nodded in agreement with Amelia's opinion. You're absolutely right, Amelia. That is the truth. Can you announce that publicly to the entire student body? With her fiery red hair, Amelia lowered her eyes and calmly replied that the perfect opportunity would arrive soon enough. Leonius stroked his chin, lost in thought. You mean the Legion training exercise? The Legion training is one of the Academy's special practical courses, a real combat drill where students from all years form units together to hunt magic beasts. Amelia placed a hand on her chest, looking confident. Upperclassmen have the right to form their own units, she explained. I'm going to add Van Kruger to my unit and show everyone his true colors. Leonius smirked, satisfied. Good. But a voice filled with intrigue suddenly rang out from the doorway of the meeting room. Sounds interesting. The grand doors swung open. The 9th Prince Henry, with his golden hair and sapphire eyes, strolled in. Henry's sudden appearance caught Leonius completely off guard. His eyes widened as he blurted out, Henry! Amelia's expression shifted, and she immediately reminded him in a stern voice, Your Highness. Amelia spoke up frankly with all due respect. This is the private meeting room of the 5-star kings. Even royalty is not permitted to enter without permission. Faced with her firm attitude, Henry bowed politely. My deepest apologies, Lady Amelia. However, he quickly looked up, flashing his familiar harmless smile as he explained, But there is something I must discuss with you regarding the upcoming Legion training. Would it be possible for my friends and me to join and train under your command? The prince's unexpected offer left Amelia stunned. Your Highness wishes to join my unit, Henry expressed sincerely. I was truly moved by the unwavering conviction I overheard you speaking of earlier. Faced with the prince's smooth and flattering words, Amelia bowed her head in acceptance. You are too kind, Your Highness. I shall humbly obey. The red-haired girl burst with determination and declared loudly, If that is the case, I will teach Van Kruger a lesson right in front of Your Highness. I will prove to him that magic is the absolute power needed to protect this country. Henry cast a sideways glance sporting a mysterious and calculating smile. Meanwhile, in another corner of the academy, the peaceful atmosphere around Van was once again shattered, dragged along miserably. Van could only grimace in frustration, cold sweat trickling down, helpless against the bossiness of his stubborn senior. After temporarily escaping from the annoying persistence of Senior Karina, Van met up with his 2 friends, Ralph and Fa, in the academy's quiet garden along with an upperclassman. Hearing the senior mention an upcoming event, Van frowned and repeated skeptically, Legion training. Seeing his bewildered look, Ralph, who was sipping tea, asked in surprise, You don't know about it. Fa, sitting beside him, quickly explained, It's an activity where we form units and carry out missions together. The curly-haired friend set his tea down. I excitedly revealed one important detail. And listen to this. Each student actually gets to command real soldiers of the kingdom. Van, while chewing on the cookie, mused. So basically, it's training to gain experience as a commander. Helen, sitting across from him, lifted her tea and added sternly, It's called training, but the missions are real combat. She began to explain the details. This time, the area of operation is the magical wilderness, known as the Wailing Marsh. These facts should have been known by students in class. Areas filled with massive magic power are called magical wildernesses, and the Forest of Darkness, where the entrance exam was held previously, is actually just a small-scale wilderness. Helen continued to explain, magic beasts usually inhabit these wildernesses, and when their numbers exceed a certain limit, they begin to migrate in search of new territory, creating a horrifying stampede. The mad migration of massive herds of magic beasts can cause terrible damage to the lives of innocent people. Therefore, periodically culling magic beasts to prevent riots is considered one of the most important duties of the kingdom's nobility. Hearing this, Van lowered his eyes, judging the situation with caution. I see. The Wailing Marsh, huh? Noticing his sudden serious expression, Helen set down her tea and asked, Is something wrong? Van quickly collected his thoughts and waved his hand dismissively. No, it's nothing. Please go ahead. Being this spaced out isn't good, Van. Helen nodded and continued to explain the operational structure for the training period. We will form units coordinating with the Academy students and the Kingdom soldiers to create a single legion based on the battle chart. First-year students will act as squad leaders directly commanding a few soldiers, while upperclassmen will combine multiple squads to manage a company. Hearing this, Ralph propped his chin on his hand and asked curiously, "If you do well here, you'll get real recognition from the royal family, right?" Helen immediately confirmed, "That's right. All members of the 5-Star Kings achieved resounding victories during their first-year Legion training." Fa folded his arms, analyzing it thoughtfully. "Since the operations take place at the company level, being assigned under the command of which company commander is extremely important. Honestly, this is tough on the underclassmen, right? If your senior doesn't like you, things get pretty tense." "Yeah, exactly. Unit assignments depend entirely on nominations from the upperclassmen," Senior Helen explained slowly. Hearing this, Van gently raised his tea. Van thought to himself that this nomination system would surely dump a magicless guy like him into some trash team that nobody wanted yet. Helen just flashed a radiant smile, revealing a surprising truth. She mentioned that quite a few upperclassmen actually wanted to nominate him. Van was caught off guard, skeptical, but Helen laughed softly to reassure him that it was all with good intentions. Because right now so many people genuinely respected his abilities. Raph and Fa, standing nearby, immediately chimed in to back her up, with Raph triumphantly insisting that everyone respected Van. It was obvious, he argued, since Van was the one who defeated the Sword Princess in that shocking duel recently. Fa nodded in agreement, adding that Van's feat of taking down the demonic Fang Beast during the entrance exam was now incredibly famous. Helen also noted that everyone was extremely curious about his combat techniques. Those skills that allowed someone with no magic power to possess such terrifying physical strength. Looking at the teacup in his hand, complex emotions welled up in Van. A member of the Gonda tribe, once treated like cattle, now received respect from the magic-using nobility. This was completely unthinkable in his previous life. This world was truly beginning to change little by little. Yet Van also understood clearly that not everyone was thrilled about this change. Assassin's sharp instincts suddenly flared up. Van flicked his gaze with a cold, piercing look toward the window of a distant castle. His sudden action made the person secretly watching from above jump in surprise. Standing behind the glass, Prince Leonius broke out in a cold sweat, trembling, unable to believe his own eyes. Did he really spot me? Impossible. He knew perfectly well that without using detection magic sensing, the presence of someone from this far away was completely impossible. Leonius gritted his teeth in frustration, coldly threatening, "Humph! Enjoy your little friendship game while you still can." Back in the quiet garden, Helen nonchalantly continued the conversation, asserting that no matter which unit Van joined, he wouldn't be mistreated, but to be sure she had a better plan. Helen smiled and announced that with the priority nomination right of a 5-Star King member, she would place Van directly into her unit, and naturally she would take both his friends. Raph and Fa were incredibly excited and let out a sigh of relief, feeling so at ease. "Now I'm really looking forward to this training session." But the cheerful atmosphere didn't last long before an overbearing voice suddenly rang out from behind. "Stop right there!" The group jumped in surprise. Turning around, they saw Senior Karina with her pink hair and pigtails marching toward them, seething. Van clicked his tongue in annoyance. Not this again. Karina stood with her hands on her hips, loudly declaring to Helen, "Supervising Van as his guardian is my responsibility. Naturally, he will also be under my command during the Legion training." Van immediately slammed the table and stood up to protest vehemently. "I already turned down that offer." She's like a leech, guys, Van thought, faced with Van's resistance. Helen just laughed, clearly amused. "Sounds interesting, doesn't it? Whatever, it's fine by me." The senior's indecisive attitude made Van snap, yelling, "Don't just decide everything on your own." A few days later, the day to announce the unit assignments finally arrived. At the Academy's main hall, the new students had gathered, packed in front of the large notice board. Looking at the boisterous crowd, Raph exclaimed, "Being nominated by high-ranking or famous upperclassmen is such an honor." Fa nodded in agreement. "At least we don't have to worry about that." Standing between his two friends, Van silently observed his surroundings and whispered to himself, "Everyone looks so serious." But as he moved closer to the board to check, Van frowned and muttered, "Not here," seeing their friend's strange expression. Raph and Fa turned back confused. "Huh, what's wrong?" Van calmly explained, "My name isn't on Helen's unit list." Raph scratched his head, guessing, "I see." What about Sword Princess Karina's unit? Van shook his head, pointing elsewhere. Not there either. Following Van's lead, the group headed toward another notice board tucked away in a corner. The board clearly stated the list for the 5th Company under the command of Captain Amelia Rodenwood, a member of the 5-Star Kings, and right below that was the name Van Kruger. Witnessing this, Raph was completely stunned and shouted, "You've got to be kidding me! The captain of that company is—" Before Raph could finish, Fa broke into a cold sweat, trembling as he pointed to the line right below. More importantly, look at the name right next to Van's. The name clearly displayed on the board was Henry Ferrania. Seeing the name of his arch-nemesis right next to his own, Van's red eyes constricted, cold sweat trickling down his cheek. Suddenly a hand tapped lightly on Van's shoulder from behind. A voice full of hidden meaning broke the silence. "What a coincidence, isn't it, Van? It's been a while since the entrance exam. Let's do our best in this platoon together." Standing to the side, observing, Amelia Rodenwood spoke coldly. "So you're Van Kruger." The redhead introduced herself with immense pride. "I am Amelia Rodenwood, one of the 5 Radiant Star Sovereigns and your captain." Van gently placed a hand over his chest and bowed politely. "I understand. My apologies for the late introduction." Amelia closed her eyes slightly and replied, "I don't mind. I'm not a fan of rigid formalities either." But then suddenly, she opened her eyes, staring straight at Van with a sharp, cold gaze, and warned in a stern voice, "However, I'll tell you this up front during this training, know your place as a Gonda, and you will follow my orders absolutely." Her blunt warning caught Van off guard, leaving him visibly startled. Just then, Helen Steinast, a senior, stepped up from behind and gently interjected, "Amelia, don't you think those words were a bit too harsh?" Amelia turned back and calmly replied, "You're wrong, Helen. This is actually mercy." She slowly explained, "If those who lack power keep trying to push to the front, they will only put their own lives at risk and push the entire unit into a dangerous situation. On the battlefield, the most important thing is for everyone to know their own role and perform it perfectly." Amelia looked straight at Van and declared loudly, "And the role of a Gonda tribesman with no mana has been predetermined. It is to serve as a scout and a sentry." Faced with such prejudiced judgment, Van looked intently into Amelia's eyes. His heart skipped a beat as he realized a truth: the eyes of this woman contained absolutely no contempt or malice. Amelia believed from the bottom of her heart that what she was saying was right. To Van, rigid people who always acted according to their beliefs like her were the most troublesome. Smiling slightly at the judgment, Van calmly replied, "Performing one's role is important. You are certainly right about that." His burning red eyes stared straight at the red-haired captain, clearly asserting, "That is exactly why I came to this academy." In Van's mind, Helen's earlier affirmation echoed once again. Using mana is not the only principle of magic. Controlling and defeating mages, without relying on mana, there is no reason why your way of existing doesn't deserve a knighthood. Returning to reality, Van spoke to Amelia in a serious tone. "What role a Gonda tribesman without magic can fulfill is something I am here to prove. Whether I am a burden or not, see it for yourself with your own eyes." Van's courageous answer made Amelia's expression shift slightly. She coldly turned her back and walked away, leaving only one remark, "At least I will acknowledge that spirit of yours." Seeing Amelia leave, Henry didn't forget to lean in and whisper, "You shouldn't worry about what Lady Amelia said. I am sure that one day you will show her your true capability." Van stood silently watching their backs as they moved further away. In another corner of the hallway, Helen and Karina were observing. Helen pensively remarked, "Is it the prince's doing?" "I guess so," Karina grumbled, continuing. "He pulled strings with the school board to interfere with the unit assignments. I didn't think he would go that far." Helen's face suddenly tightened with worry. Standing alone in the hallway, Van clicked his tongue and muttered to himself, "Things are getting complicated." This mission was dangerous enough as it was. Van's anxiety was completely justified as memories of the sweep from his previous life suddenly flooded his mind, the campaign to exterminate the magical beasts at the Weeping Swamp. There, the kingdom's army encountered a new species of magical beast. That unit suffered near total annihilation. It was an extremely brutal battle, where the blood of the kingdom's soldiers stained the entire cold swamp red under the claws of the giant deformed monsters. Van thought to himself, the monsters caused a riot afterwards, trampling and causing horrific damage to the surrounding areas. Many heroes were born from that battle, But they were quickly crushed because the tragic battle at the Weeping Swamp in my previous life brought heavy devastation to the kingdom and became the underlying cause, eventually leading to the brutal civil war later on. Seeing Van standing dazed, Ralph called out, "Van, are you okay?" Van, startled, turned back and answered, "Yeah, just thinking about a few things." His heart was currently filled with worries. If that new species of magical beast appeared in this life, Ralph and the others would certainly not escape being severely injured. He truly wanted to avoid that terrible scenario at all costs. Initially, Van had planned a quick response by joining Helen or Karina's unit to act easily, but now everything had become extremely difficult since he was assigned to Amelia's company. In the distance, Karina stood with her arms crossed, smugly saying to the person next to her, "Look, he's looking at me. He really wants to join my unit." Helen, standing next to her, could only break into a cold sweat and force a laugh. "Oh, I wonder if that's true." In reality, Van was just glancing over to assess the situation. But Van's burning red eyes narrowed cold and sharp. To him, the real danger ahead was not limited to those trivial games. This campaign definitely won't be peaceful enough for them to have time for such antics. The departure day arrived. The entire legion, with rows of orderly soldiers and mages, had gathered in the academy courtyard. Leading the way, Amelia's company, clad in valiant white armor, rode on horseback and shouted loudly, "Listen up, members of the company! From here on, we will advance as the vanguard of all the academy units entering the Weeping Swamp." She spoke with a stern, fiery tone to the entire army. "I expect each and every one of you to show the pride of a noble and the determination of a true soldier." Responding to the red-haired captain's call, hundreds of soldiers shouted in unison, echoing through the sky, "Yes, Captain!" The army began to march out in a rumble, heading straight for the dangerous wilderness. Ninth Prince Henry rode a white horse in the middle of the ranks. The kingdom's soldiers were currently extremely excited and full of spirit as they set out. They proudly chatted, "I can't believe we get to serve under the prince's command. If we earn great merit here, we will surely bring glory to our homeland," Van whispered to himself, witnessing the high spirits of the kingdom's soldiers as they brimmed with fervor. Yet when he turned to look at his own squad, he could only mutter to himself, "Good grief, look at these guys, how pathetic," in complete contrast to the elite nature of the other units. The men under Van's command were a ragged, undisciplined, and incredibly crude bunch, openly grumbling and complaining right in the ranks. "What the hell is this? Is Aganda really our squad leader?" A middle-aged soldier and a blonde man with a pipe pointed at him with contempt. "Look at that. He isn't even carrying a weapon." "No magic, no weapons, what a joke." Another sighed with dissatisfaction. "Are we just cannon fodder?" Hearing the complaints voiced openly right in front of him, Van closed his eyes and sighed, then firmly turned his horse around to face them, announcing in a stern voice, "Let me say this one more time. I am Van Kruger, your squad leader. From now on, I will be the one in command of you all." Looking at the dissatisfied faces looking up at him, Van coldly ordered, "I'm sure you have a lot to say, but from this moment on, talking is forbidden. Focus on the assigned mission as soldiers of the kingdom. Is that clear?" Van's firm attitude silenced the ragged soldiers, though they clicked their tongues in annoyance. Van glanced at them and silently assessed, "A bunch of losers with no morale, huh?" From the front company commander. Amelia Rodenwood glanced back at Van's squad and silently judged, "Pathetic. But it's an inevitable result with no bias involved." There was no division of soldiers by the upperclassmen. The soldiers chose their own commanders, Amelia mused. For a soldier, the commander they serve under will directly decide their fate on the battlefield. Who would want to entrust their life to a Ganda with no magic? The result was that ambitious, skilled soldiers would fight to gather under high-ranking nobles, leaving only the long-serving soldiers, with no hope of promotion, to be pushed down to serve under that person. Amelia looked at Van's back as he rode at the head of his ragged squad, coldly delivering her verdict. "The quality of the soldiers gathered reflects the stature of the commander. That is your limit as a commander, Van Kruger." Faced with the cold judgments and contempt of everyone around him, Van kept a calm expression. The mobilization trumpet echoed throughout the academy, and company commander Amelia announced clearly, "Are all units ready? We begin the march." The vanguard set out impressively, heading straight into the Weeping Swamp to the synchronized cheers of the soldiers. Van silently rode his horse at the rear. Under suspicious gazes, they followed him but did not respect him, their attitude plain to see. The army moved deep into the gloomy wilderness, passing over rough and treacherous trails, after a long period of marching. Amelia raised her hand to signal a halt. All units stop. We will rest for a while at this waypoint. The training atmosphere of the other squads was incredibly serious and disciplined. Squad leaders constantly urged their men to drink water and maintain vigilance. They checked armor weapons and reported their physical condition truthfully. However, in Van's squad, the ragged soldiers sprawled out on the ground, tired and complaining with dissatisfaction. The purple-haired soldier gritted his teeth and muttered, "Damn it, making us walk this much." The fat soldier next to him joined in with contempt. The captain gets to ride a horse comfortably. No wonder he finds it easy. Standing behind them, Van heard every one of those insults. He glanced at them thoughtfully. Seeing Van's silent attitude, the purple-haired soldier turned back and asked aggressively, "Hey, Captain, you got nothing to say?" Van replied calmly, "No." But his indifferent answer only made the soldier snap. He jumped up eyes wide and barked, "You look like you have plenty to say. Since it's break time, I'll listen to whatever you've got." Van remained silent. The soldier gritted his teeth in fury and shouted wildly in his face, "Then let me go first. What the hell is this squad anyway?" The purple-haired soldier continued to shout, inciting the crowd, pointing at his gear and saying bitterly, "Our equipment is worn out and our captain is a Ganda. Empty-handed and without magic, are we really going into the land of magical beasts like this? The Academy must be trying to turn us into cannon fodder for the nobles, right?" Faced with those disgruntled complaints, Van remained completely composed. He lowered his eyes and said softly, "I won't blame you. For soldiers like you who the guide is determines. Whether you live or die, however you are mistaken." His sudden movement startled the purple-haired soldier. "Huh!" Van's crimson eyes glowed with pressure. He clenched both fists and continued, "You won't understand just by talking. I'll let you see and hear it for yourselves." The purple-haired soldier began to break into a cold sweat, stuttering, "What are you planning to do?" Van stood tall before the entire squad and declared, "If you have any complaints, come at me. All of you at once is fine too. I'll take you all on." Van's provocation stunned the soldiers around him. The purple-haired soldier felt his self-esteem trampled upon and gritted his teeth in rage. He immediately drew the sharp sword from his back, lunged wildly toward Van and roared, "Don't mess with us, you Ganda trash!" facing the blade rushing directly at him. Van's red eyes narrowed, focusing intently on the trajectory of the strike in a split second. With bare hands, Van caught and completely neutralized his opponent's sword strike, not even giving him a chance to react before delivering a decisive blow that sent the purple-haired soldier flying. He landed headfirst in the dirt, pathetic and dazed. Van's lightning reflexes left the surrounding soldiers in total shock. They gasped in disbelief as Van calmly picked up the sword he'd just snatched away. His crimson eyes locked onto the defeated man groveling on the ground, and he asked coldly, "Aren't you going to get up?" Looking at the blade in his hand, Van let out a soft sigh and said, "You said your gear was worn out, right?" In a flash, Van swung the sword, delivering a strike so fast it sliced a massive ancient tree behind them clean in two. The soldiers watched in horror as the tree crashed to the ground with a thunderous boom. Witnessing Van's terrifying power, the purple-haired soldier and his men were completely frozen, cold sweat pouring down their faces in pure fear. Van looked at the sword in his hand and commented calmly, "It's a bit old, but it still gets the job done. It's not that I don't know how to use weapons. After studying and mastering all sorts of them, I chose this hand-to-hand combat style." He looked at the soldiers and continued, "Don't worry. I'll find the best way to make use of you all. I won't let you die for nothing." But suddenly Van's crimson eyes darkened with bloodlust. He coldly delivered a brutal warning, "And if you don't want that to happen, then feel free to go become monster feed." The bone-chilling threat left the purple-haired soldier and the rest of the squad completely silenced, trembling and afraid to utter another word. Van let his killing intent fade, watched the trembling soldiers, and thought to himself, that should be enough. From a distance, Captain Amelia Rodenwood watched the whole scene from her horse. She clicked her tongue silently, judging his actions as incredibly foolish, daring to lay a hand on his own soldiers. To her, a true army must be led by the heart, not by fear. Those who submit out of terror might be obedient in normal times, but once pushed into a desperate situation, those chains of fear will easily shatter. When that happens, they're sure to turn around and betray you. Commander Amelia cast one last cold look before urging her horse forward and riding off. She silently passed her verdict, "Your unit is finished, Van Kruger." That night, the entire army marched deeper into the forest and decided to set up camp right before the edge of the Weeping Marsh. Under the bright moonlight, the camp was fortified with extreme care. Inside her tent, Amelia was busy studying the battle map by the light of a storm lamp while the ninth Prince Henry sat lost in thought reading a book in a dark corner of the camp. Van's ragtag squad was huddled around a fire. One soldier, chewing on a piece of rock-hard dry ration, asked curiously, "Hey, where's the captain?" The bald soldier sitting next to him shook his head and replied, "Who knows, he's not in his tent either. Maybe he got so scared he ditched us and ran off." Hearing this, the purple-haired soldier just gave a bitter laugh. That wouldn't be anything new. He stared into the fire, his voice dropping full of resentment. "Anyway, look at us. This squad is nothing but cannon fodder, the leftovers of the kingdom's army. Being under a Gonda clan captain, in a way, I guess we're a pretty good match." "Oh, so you're all leftovers, are you?" A voice suddenly rang out from the shadows, making the purple-haired soldier jump in panic. What? From the murky darkness of the forest, Van calmly stepped out, carrying a large tree branch over his shoulder. He said softly, "I just got back. Picked up a few things on the way." A loud thud echoed as Van dropped his load onto the ground, a massive fat rabbit along with a pile of fresh, delicious forest mushrooms. Looking at the feast lying right before them, the soldiers froze, staring at each other in stifling silence. A pot of mushroom soup began to bubble away. Beside it, skewers of roasting meat filled the air with a mouth-watering aroma. Van looked at the fire and spoke up, "It's time." The ragged soldiers stared at the feast, swallowing their saliva, yet their hearts were still full of doubt. "Starving to death anyway, what are you up to, Van?" He scooped a bowl of soup and handed it to the brown-haired ringleader, saying, "Eat. Dry rations won't give you the strength you need for tomorrow's battle." And he wasn't done yet. He handed him a handful of medicinal herbs and instructed, "Also crush these herbs and rub them inside your boots. They're very effective for treating blisters on your feet." The brown-haired soldier clicked his tongue, guarded. "What is this? This is so sudden. Are you trying to win us over with food now?" Facing his suspicion, Van lowered his gaze and said in a low voice, "I used to be just like you." Van's words left the brown-haired soldier stunned. "Huh," Van explained slowly. "Walking until you drop, feet covered in blisters, being handed bread as hard as stone, and if you were unlucky, being tortured by diarrhea until you almost collapsed." Before the real battle had even begun, Van's painfully honest words touched the hearts of the ragtag squad. They listened in silence, a deep sense of empathy rising within them, because anyone who's been a soldier has been through that. Standing behind them, two soldiers whispered, "He has battlefield experience at that age. High as of the Gonda clan, so it wouldn't be surprising if he's been through all that." The brown-haired ringleader narrowed his eyes and asked sternly, "So, Van, are you pitying us because we're in the same spot you were in before?" Van looked straight at him and firmly denied it. "No, this isn't pity. It's an investment for my own goals. I'm going to use you all as my pawns to rack up glory." Van surveyed the entire squad, his voice ringing with a firm, resolute vow. "But I promise I will never treat you like cannon fodder. I will make sure everyone makes it back alive because your survival is what matters most right now. Become my pawns. I won't let you regret it." As he spoke, Van smiled and handed a steaming bowl of soup to the rebellious purple-haired soldier, his blunt proposal backed by pure sincerity. The soldier was left completely stunned, and the others standing behind him couldn't help but look on in shock. After a moment of thoughtful silence, the purple-haired man suddenly let out a soft, dry laugh. "Now you want us to become your pawns?" Van asked calmly. "Is that funny to you?" The soldier shrugged. "Who knows? But this is the first time I've seen someone from the Gonda clan act so bold." Watching the purple-haired soldier take the bowl of soup, another soldier leaned in and whispered anxiously, "Are you really going to trust this captain?" The man with the purple hair let out a soft sigh, took a sip of the hot soup, and replied, "Do we have any other choice? Besides, he's at least very strong and he makes good food too. Compared to those nobles who only talk big, he seems much more reliable." Hearing the positive buzz from the soldiers behind him, Van smiled slightly. These reactions were things he already knew, like the back of his hand from his previous life. Ordinary soldiers are completely different from the nobility. They never risk their lives for lofty ideals, or empty slogans like "for the country," or "for the people." To them, their only and greatest goal is to survive and return to the families waiting day and night back home. Because he understood that brutal reality so well, Van decided he would never use empty promises to convince them. The only things he would offer were overwhelming strength and the most practical benefit possible. Survival that was the only path to winning over these men and earning their absolute trust. Watching the soldiers happily gathered around the warm campfire, Van's gaze softened with determination. The next morning, as the first light of dawn broke, the entire camp began bustling with activity, breaking down tents. Inside the command tent, Captain Amelia Rodenwood gave a stern order to the messenger. "Once the retreat is complete, wait for my signal." The soldier immediately bowed, shouting, "Understood!" Amelia frowned in confusion. Had the world turned upside down overnight? The previously stubborn brown-haired soldier stood at attention, now approaching Van to report with deep respect. "Captain, the cleanup is complete. We can depart whenever you're ready." Van smiled with satisfaction and gave a gentle instruction. "Good. Hold your positions until the next order and stay sharp on the lookout." Upon receiving the command, the entire squad shouted in unison, full of vigor, "Yes, sir," seeing the organized ranks and the absolute obedience of the previously ragtag group. Amelia, watching from a distance, couldn't help but be struck. She whispered to herself, "He turned those discarded thugs around in just one night." This astonishing change in Van forced Amelia to re-evaluate his abilities. Amelia contemplated and admitted, "It seems he does possess the makings of a commander." Henry smiled and agreed, "Perhaps because he is of the Ganda clan he knows how to lead soldiers in a way that we cannot." Amelia lowered her eyes, continuing in a serious tone, "That ability will truly be put to the test on the battlefield." The next morning, a whistle echoed across the camp. Amelia shouted loudly, "Attention, all squad leaders, report to me. I will be briefing you on our combat orders right now." At the tactical table set up in the forest, the squad leaders quickly gathered around a massive map. Amelia pointed at it sternly, explaining the situation. "Beyond this forest lies our target area, the Weeping Marsh." She explained the terrain in detail. Most of the marsh is grassland reaching up to your waist, with small scattered patches of forest throughout. Visibility is generally decent, but the entire area has become the domain of magical beasts. Prepare yourselves, even a small patch of grass could be a hiding spot for a monster. Hearing this, the inexperienced squad leaders started to feel a bit uneasy. Amelia continued deeper into the plan. "I will now explain our combat strategy. As the vanguard of the Legion, our role is to recon the enemy's situation in the marsh." She declared decisively, "We will employ a direct sweep. Therefore, our unit will form a wedge formation and sweep through the marsh." This risky direct attack formation immediately left the squad leaders feeling very anxious. One person panicked, blurting out in shock, "We're going to charge straight into the enemy." By definition, armed reconnaissance means actively entering the enemy's territory to gauge their strength through their level of resistance. This method is incredibly dangerous, but it is the fastest way to grasp the scale of the enemy's forces. Amelia pointed back to the map and explained, "Fortunately, the ground in the Weeping Marsh is relatively firm. War horses can move through it. As long as we avoid the actual bogs and streams breaking through, shouldn't be a problem." Amelia looked around and asked, "Are there any questions?" Amidst the silence, Van suddenly raised his hand and stepped forward to bluntly challenge, "Why use armed reconnaissance instead of standard scouting?" Amelia turned to explain, "This marsh is vast with countless places for monsters to hide. Sending small, careful scout groups won't allow us to accurately determine their numbers. Therefore, we are forced to go in with full strength to stir up the enemy, forcing them to reveal themselves and fight back. By doing so, we will quickly gather reliable intelligence without wasting time. That is the greatest advantage of armed reconnaissance." Hearing the thorough explanation, the other squad leaders couldn't help but admire her logic. "I see. A bold strategy, but extremely rational. Truly worthy of being an heir to the family. Rodenwood, the defenders of the kingdom's borders." But Amelia cut them off, her expression hardening immediately. "You are all heirs to noble houses. Kingdom nobility. Those empty praises are unnecessary." She looked at all the cadets and emphasized, "Do not just know how to obey blindly. Express your own thoughts. This is a training session. There is nothing to be afraid of." Faced with the captain's demand, the cadets could only look at each other in silence. Just then, a firm set of footsteps broke the silence. Van stepped forward resolutely, his crimson eyes locked onto Amelia. He proposed an alternative. "Instead of an armed reconnaissance, we should send a small scouting team." Van's sudden suggestion caught both Amelia and Elizabeth's attention. Van pointed at the map and explained, "According to the map, the swamp terrain has too much open sight. If the whole force moves in before we find the beasts, they will have already discovered us." Amelia raised an eyebrow and replied, "That's right. That is exactly why we must use armed reconnaissance. but Van remained firm, countering, "But if we have to endure a preemptive strike from them, the entire unit could be completely wiped out." His warning caused Amelia's gaze to sharpen cold and icy. "Do you think I would suffer a crushing defeat at the hands of some beasts?" Van looked straight at her, calm and steady. "Because I am responsible for the lives of the soldiers under my command, assuming the worst-case scenario is only natural, even if the probability is 1 in 10,000. Seeing Van's serious attitude, Amelia softened her tone slightly. "I understand your concern, so what do you suggest we do?" Van presented his plan clearly. "My squad will advance first as bait to draw out the enemy's attack." He pointed to the tactical diagram and continued to explain. "If the main force only advances after confirming the direction of their attack, the risk of being ambushed will be greatly reduced." Hearing the detailed plan, Amelia pondered for a moment, then spoke. "I commend your courage for daring to speak your mind. That is the proper attitude of a future officer." Van thought to himself, will she accept it? But Amelia immediately poured cold water on the idea. "However, from a tactical standpoint, this method is too cowardly. If we follow that approach, the reconnaissance will not be completed before the army's main force arrives," Van exclaimed in surprise, but Amelia immediately cut him off, her voice stern. "Furthermore, if our presence is detected, it will give the enemy extra time to prepare. That, conversely, will only choke us." The captain's sharp argument left Van only able to grit his teeth in silence. Amelia swung her arm decisively, radiating the charisma of a true commander. Attacking the enemy before they can prepare, that is the most effective tactic. Amelia admitted that Van's theory was perfectly correct under normal conditions. But deep down, Van knew for certain that this operation was destined to fail. He spoke up bluntly to warn her. "We are just a temporary training unit. We have absolutely no experience in reacting to unexpected threats." Amelia immediately challenged him back. "What threats?" "The number of enemies or terrain traps give me concrete evidence." The captain's question left Van stuck in a deadlock. It was true he could not explain it clearly. In his previous life, Van was just a mercenary operating on the far western border. Moreover, all information regarding the monsters appearing in the swamp, at that time, had been blocked by the kingdom's military and scrubbed from official records. Henry was likely the one who knew about this, but that was not something Van had been involved with in his past life. Seeing Van's hesitation, Amelia coldly ruled, "Concerns without evidence are only considered cowardice. They only needlessly lower the morale of the soldiers." Van still tried to persuade her, but before he could finish his sentence, Amelia shouted in anger, "Enough! I allow suggestions, but if you continue, it will be considered an act of insubordination. Step back now." Van cruised under the weight of the captain's authority. Van could only stand in silence watching as Amelia turned away and announced loudly to the whole army, "That's enough. We will now begin the armed reconnaissance operation. I will personally lead the company from the front. All units prepare to deploy immediately." All the soldiers and cadets shouted in unison, "Understood!" Amelia glanced at Van, then coldly let out a sarcastic remark. "Finally, Van Cruiser, if you want to battle that cautious, your squad will take the rear guard. That is the safest place." Crushed by the captain's authority, Van clicked his tongue helplessly. He understood well that openly, defying orders at the academy right now, could lead to extremely severe punishments. Minor expulsion, major prison time. Van's bluntness quickly became a topic of gossip for the other cadets. They thought he was too arrogant for daring to argue with Amelia, and being pushed to the rear guard would certainly mean he couldn't earn any merits. But under the shadow of his hood, Van's crimson eyes never stopped observing. He was not discouraged, but silently determined to think hard. There must be something he could do. "No, precisely because I'm in the back I can carry out that plan."